Chapter 929. Liuyanling left, and so did Ashima. When Guhan woke up the next day, apart from the sword maidens, there were no other humans by his side. Guhan. No, there was still a human by his side. The little lowly that Guhan saved from hiding in the rubbish bin was still by Guhan's side. She had no intention of going home at all. However, Guhan could no longer stay in Guangguang amusement park. He no longer had any attachment to this place, and it was time for Guhan to leave. On the way back, he could send this little lowly named 2303 back to her parents. Although it was foreseeable that this little lowly would soon lose her innocent lowly smile and turn into a dull walking corpse like most of the humans here without sufficient food and could only rely on the fragrant powder in the air to survive. However, it could not be helped. It was impossible for Guhan to keep the little lowly by his side. Although she would become a walking corpse in Guangguang amusement park, at least her life would be safe. However, if she followed Guhan to Shanghai Pass, when the Wu people came to attack, this little lowly would definitely be the first victim. There was no doubt about it. After packing his luggage, Guhan left his room with the sword maidens. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he bumped into Dr. Roman, whom he had met once before. Guhan narrowed his eyes when he saw Dr. Roman. This was because Dr. Roman had walked out of the room that originally belonged to Chidu Isuzu. Dr. Roman. Hello. Guhan took the initiative to greet Dr. Roman. Hello, Mr. Guhan. Roman glanced at the sword maidens behind Guhan and smiled curiously. Are you leaving, Mr. Guhan? Yes. After all, this is not a place for us sword bearers. It's time for me to leave. Guhan nodded. I'm fine. After all, Mr. Guhan was once the son-in-law of Guangguang amusement park. As long as Mr. Guhan is willing, you can come back anytime. We sincerely welcome you. Dr. Roman took the initiative to shake Guhan's hand. Is Dr. Roman in charge of Shining Amusement Park now? Guhan skillfully pulled his hand out from Dr. Roman's grip and asked curiously. Yeah. Actually, I don't want to do such a troublesome thing. However, the general manager had passed away, and the deputy general manager had returned to the past. The entire Guanghui amusement park could not be without a leader. In the end, during the meeting yesterday, everyone unanimously forced me to take this position. I couldn't refuse even if I wanted to. I had no choice but to sit here temporarily as a temporary manager. Manager Roman scratched his head. But my position is temporary. As soon as Miss Black Tortoise comes back, she will be the manager of Guanghui amusement park. I'm just helping her look after it temporarily. There's no need to add a temporary term for yourself. Guhan patted Dr. Roman's shoulder. Just be the general manager of this amusement park. I believe that even if Black Tortoise comes back, she won't want to stay here anymore. She has a wider world in the future. She won't be confined here anymore. Is that so? But the wider the world, the more troubles there are. Dr. Roman's eyes were bright and full of vigor. They were filled with a brilliance that Guhan had only seen in the eyes of a powerhouse who had seen through the mundane world. There's no better place than here. Only after you've passed the peak will you understand that a simple and peaceful life is the best. That's only your personal peak. That's only your personal peace and happiness. Guhan looked out the window at the countless people walking around Guanghui amusement park like walking corpses. When the whole world can live a peaceful and happy life, that's true peace and happiness. Then I can only pray that you can realize this one day. Dr. Roman suddenly leaned his back against Guhan's back. Everyone's thoughts are beautiful, but no matter how powerful a person is, the world can't move according to his will. Even the God who created this world can't do anything when faced with the changes of the world. We're already very lucky to be able to keep our own freedom. It's a fool's dream to think that we can influence others. No matter how strong a huge tree is, it can't stop the unceasing flow of the Yangtze River. Only by turning oneself into a small boat and drifting on the river can one be truly peaceful and happy. I heard that in ancient times, there was an Emperor Yu who used his entire life to change the course of the Yangtze River and the Yellow River, as well as thousands of tributaries. In the end, he turned ancient Huaxia into a paradise on earth. I, Guhan, am not talented, but I want to learn from this Emperor Yu. Even if I can't change the course of the Yangtze River and the Yellow River, I can at least fill up the stinking ditch beside me. Young man. Dr. Roman clenched his fist and punched Guhan's waist. I'll wait for this day. With that, Dr. Roman slowly walked towards the depths of the castle. Carrying the little lowly 2303, Guhan walked on the muddy streets of the radiant city with the few sword maidens behind him. Although he couldn't bring the little lowly back to the human world, Guhan was still able to escort her home. Under the guidance of the little lowly, Guhan walked for over 10 minutes on the muddy path and finally arrived at the door of a thatched hut. This was a very simple thatched hut. The thatch on the roof seemed to have not been taken care of for a very long time. It could be seen that the thatch on the roof had been completely empty in a few places, leaving behind holes. The walls of the thatched hut were not much better. Not only were there all sorts of holes on the walls, but a small part of the wall had also completely collapsed. Without opening the door, Guhan could clearly see the situation inside the thatched hut. Daddy. Mommy. I'm back. Since she hadn't been home for a long time, the little lowly excitedly rushed home. Unfortunately, compared to the little lowly's excitement, the people in the house were extremely cold. The parents sat on the bed like stiff corpses. After hearing the little lowly's voice, they merely glanced at her and ignored her. Only a boy who was slightly older than the little lowly revealed an excited expression. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. In the end, the little boy closed his mouth and sat on the bed like his parents, no longer paying attention to the little lowly who had returned home. Are they really 2303's mommy and daddy? Seeing this scene, Chijien was very sad. Although they already knew about the state of this world from Guhan, when these sword maidens saw these apathetic humans with their own eyes, they couldn't help but feel sorrowful. These were humans, the primate of all living beings. They were a group of living humans, but now they had become walking corpses. What was the point of living like this? I'll think of a way to save them in the future. But for now, we have to go back. Guhan waved at 2303 and left Radiant City with the sword maidens, leaving this place where Guhan had completely lost his black tortoise. Big brother Guhan, where are you guys going? Seeing that Guhan and the rest were about to leave, 2303 immediately strode out of the straw hut with her slender legs, wanting to hug Guhan. However, with a slight push of Jiu Han's palm, a gentle gust of wind enveloped 2303's body, directly blowing 2303 back onto his bed. Big brother Guhan, don't you want to go? 2303 doesn't want to leave you. 2303 still wants to eat with you. 2303 kept struggling on the bed, but no matter how much she struggled, Guhan's sword chi kept her firmly on the bed. Guhan took one last look at 2303 and let out a long sigh. With another wave of sword chi, he prepared to close the door of the straw hut and cut off 2303's thoughts. Little fellow, you've already let this child taste the deliciousness of food, and she's still so young. I'm afraid that after you leave, she won't be willing to absorb the fragrant powder in the air anymore. I'm afraid that the child's only fate is to starve to death. An old voice came from behind Guhan, causing the flesh on Guhan's face to slightly tremble. Actually, Guhan had already noticed an old man walking towards him. However, Guhan thought that this old man was also a walking corpse, so he didn't pay much attention to him. He didn't expect that this old man was actually a normal human who could speak so clearly. Old man, what do you mean by that? Guhan turned around and asked. Let me tell you a story. I originally had 4 grandchildren, but I'm only left with one now. Due to a moment of carelessness, I left a piece of bread on the table, and it was eaten by my 3 grandchildren. In the end, because my 3 poor grandchildren tasted the deliciousness of food, they couldn't eat the fragrant powder in the air anymore. Their parents didn't care about their children's lives at all. By the time I went to see them, the 3 grandchildren had already starved to death. The old man spoke very calmly, but Guhan could hear a deep sorrow in this calmness. At the same time, Guhan completely understood what this old man meant. If it was really as he said, 2303, this little lowly who had tasted the deliciousness of food, would most likely completely starve to death because she refused to use the fragrant powder in the air. After all, Children didn't have the ability to control themselves. They weren't like adults who would disregard everything to survive. Sigh. With a sweep of Guhan's sword chi, the straw hut's door suddenly burst open. This little lowly, flew back like a frisbee and landed firmly in Guhan's arms. Big brother Guhan. Don't leave me behind. In the future, I'll only eat a bowl of porridge for every meal, or half a bowl. 2303 only wants to stay by Big Brother Guhan's side. Big Brother Guhan, don't leave me behind. 2303 cried until her face was like a flower in front of Guhan. However, she didn't know if it was because she was afraid that crying too loudly would make Guhan hate her and leave her here. Therefore, when 2303 cried, she used her little hands to cover her mouth and let out meowing sounds like a kitten. Come with me. I think you must have a lot of questions to ask me. The old man looked at her with a faint smile and no longer said anything to Guhan. He slowly walked deeper into the city center of Radiant City. Chapter 930. Lord, please take a seat. The old man's house was located in the deepest part of Radiant City. It was also the only brick house in the entire city. It was also the only one that looked decent and had been frequently repaired. Lord, please have a taste. This is the green grass tea unique to Radiant City. I've tasted its taste before. The old man placed a cup of green tea in front of him. Ji-Yuan picked up the cup and lightly swirled it in front of his nose. He immediately knew that this cup of green grass tea was truly worthy of its name. It was made entirely from green grass. There was a strong smell of grass and soil in it. This wasn't a taste that ordinary people could accept. However, Guhan didn't hesitate and drank the tea in one gulp. I want it too, I want it too. When Qingpin saw Guhan drinking the tea, he thought that it was some kind of peerless delicacy. He hugged Guhan's arm and shouted. The old man faintly smiled and poured another cup of tea for Qingpin. Qingpin only took a sip and instantly sprayed the tea out of his mouth like a fountain. What a disgusting taste, it's like eating grass. Qingpin grumbled in dissatisfaction. Qingpin, please keep quiet. Otherwise, you'll have to return to my scabbard first. Guhan faintly said to Qingpin. Qingpin stuck out his tongue and obediently entered Guhan's infant pouch. Lord, you're really bold. This old man admires you. The old man expressed his admiration twice and chuckled. I believe that Lord must have a lot of questions. Then, allow this old man to slowly answer Lord. This old man's surname is Nai, first name Fengbo, first name Yuanda. My ancestral home is Fengyang, Anhui Province. I've lived for 60 years in vain. I've made a fool of myself in front of Lord. The old man first introduced himself. However, this seemingly simple self-introduction allowed Ji-Yuan to hear a lot of hidden meanings in the words. First of all, this old man actually had words. 1 surname, 2 given names, and 3 characters were the naming characteristics of Huaxia in the Middle Ages. However, in the modern age, characters gradually disappeared, and Huaxia people only had their given names and surnames. This was something that many Chinese didn't know before the apocalypse. After the apocalypse, words completely disappeared from Chinese customs. Only people like Guhan, who had a deep understanding of history and culture, knew the meaning of words. Also, if you caught 1,000 people in Yangjing City and asked them what it meant to live a 60-year cycle, I'm afraid that not a single one of these 1,000 people would be able to answer the true meaning of 60-year cycle. The so-called Jiazi referred to a reincarnation cycle in the ancient Chinese calendar. Starting from the year of Jiazi, the following years were divided into the year of Icho, year of Bingyin, year of Dingmao, year of Wuchen, year of Jisi, year of Gungwu, year of Jiawu, year of Wushu, year of Xinhai, year of Guihai. I believe that everyone can filter out the years of Jiawu, year of Wushu, and year of Xinhai, which represented the naval battle of Jiawu, year of Wushu, year of Xinhai, year of Xinhai, year of Jiawu, year of Wushu, year of Xinhai, and year of Guihai. In total, there was a reincarnation cycle of 60 years. The Jiazi could also be used to express age. One Jiazi referred to a reincarnation cycle of the Jiazi calendar, which was 60 years. This old man said that he had lived a 60-year cycle in vain, which meant that he was currently 60 years old. From the sparse white hair on his temples, he seemed to be at least 80 years old at first glance. Unexpectedly, he was only 60 years old. He really aged quickly. From this old man called Nifongwa, he knew the meaning of words, and could also use 60 years to describe his own age. This meant that this old man had a very clear understanding of the history and culture before the apocalypse. This was something that humans living in large cities had almost forgotten. However, in a world that was isolated from the rest of the world and where most humans were walking corpses, there was only one explanation for this old man's clear knowledge of so much history and culture. The humans here had come to this dimensional rift before the cultural destruction because only humans from before the cultural destruction could preserve so much historical and cultural knowledge in this barren world. At the thought of this, Guhan felt some anticipation. If these humans had really come here before the cultural destruction, they might be able to preserve a lot of historical and cultural information. In that case, they might be able to preserve many historical and cultural materials from before the Great Cultural Collapse. They might even be able to find the novel that contained information about the Qingping sword that Ji Han urgently needed. Guhan, who was filled with anticipation, didn't interrupt and allowed Nifongwa to continue narrating. In 2051 AD, which is more than 950 years ago, our ancestors had been hiding in an underground air raid shelter in North Korea. This hiding lasted for more than 50 years. Later, the food reserves in the air raid shelter were almost depleted. Our ancestors, who were hiding underground, could only take the risk and climb out of the air raid shelter in an attempt to find food outside. However, our ancestors were unlucky. The moment they came out, they encountered the battle between the Chileen and the black tortoise. The Chileen and the black tortoise were both sacred beasts of the human world. A casual strike from these two sacred beasts could shatter an entire mountain. Almost all of our ancestors who came out to adventure died tragically under the attacks of the Chileen and the black tortoise. Only the 7 of us survived. They fled all the way and finally escaped into a cave. There, they discovered this mystical world and finally settled down in this world. In the beginning, life in this world was pleasant. There was water, grassland, and some animals that our ancestors brought over. Thus, the 7 of us slowly multiplied. Later on, the goddess who lived in Daming Lake also accidentally entered this world. However, everyone lived very harmoniously with the gods and were very happy. Just like that, after more than 100 years, under the efforts of the 7 ancestors, they formed a tribe of over 1,000 people. Just when the ancestors thought that they could live peacefully here, an accident happened. Hearing Nifongwa's words, Guhan couldn't help but have an urge to ridicule. From 7 to 1,000 in 150 years, this was equivalent to the population doubling every 15 years. Perhaps the lives of the survivors here were really dull. Apart from ****, there wasn't any entertainment. That was why they were able to satisfy such a high intensity of population growth. Of course, there was something even more interesting. Even if the 7 ancestors were a combination of 3 men and 4 women or 4 women and 3 men without any blood relations, when they started multiplying, no matter how meticulous the calculations were, it was inevitable that there would be siblings or cousins. Thus, it seemed that the entire Radiant City was the product of close relatives. Of course, in such a critical moment, the reproduction of humans became the most important thing. As for ethics and blood relations, they could be temporarily tossed aside. After all, according to the legends of humans, all humans relied on Nuer and Fushi to reproduce, and all humans were also the product of inbreeding. Although he wanted to ridicule in his heart, Guhan chose to keep his mouth shut and listen to Nifongwa's narration. Our ancestors will always remember that day. 2 demons suddenly tore through the sky of this world and crashed into the Norland prairie. The dust they raised covered the entire world, and the sky was covered in haze for an entire month. After a month, when everything calmed down, the 2 fireballs completely disappeared, leaving only 2 huge pits in the Norland prairie. But from that day onwards, this world underwent a monstrous change. The land that was originally able to grow fertile rice gradually began to change, and the land began to become worthless. Apart from weeds, no other crop seeds could grow in it. After a few days, when the seeds were dug out, they discovered that they had turned into hard stones. At first, only the land near the two pits underwent this change. But gradually, like a contagious disease, with the pits as the center, the rest of the land gradually became unfarmable. Our ancestors began to fear and prayed to the gods day and night, hoping to heal the scars of the land. But it was to no avail. When more than half of the land in this world could not be farmed, another 3 gods invaded this world. These 3 gods launched an unparalleled battle, and in the end, one of them was sealed under the earth, while the other 2 were seriously injured. They were rescued by us humans and arranged for them to recuperate in the tribe. After the injuries of the gods were healed, our ancestors offered their most precious possessions and knelt in front of the gods, hoping that the gods could save the damaged land and make it suitable for humans to farm again. The gods accepted our request, and the 2 gods went to investigate the 2 huge pits. They told us that there were 2 most terrifying demons hidden in the deep pits, and that these 2 demons could completely destroy the entire world with just a puff of air. Fortunately, these 2 demons had sealed each other, and even after tens of thousands of years, they wouldn't be able to break out of the seal, so we didn't have to worry about these demons hurting us for the time being. However, these 2 demons were simply too powerful. Just a bit of their aura was enough to pollute the entire land, and gradually, all of the land would become unfarmable. As such, the gods advised us to escape from this space. There were already very safe cities built by our compatriots outside, and as long as we could enter those cities, we would be able to live a stable and peaceful life. Unfortunately, our ancestors were so frightened by the outside world that they didn't dare to leave this safe place, and still chose to live here. At the same time, the gods began to summon this huge radiant amusement park in the place where the other god was suppressed, and told us that this amusement park could use the power of the gods to create fragrant powder in the air, and then taught us a set of chi channeling method. As long as we keep practicing this set of chi channeling method, we can transform the fragrant powder in the air into the energy needed by our bodies, and we can continue to survive even without relying on food. But there is a price to pay. The price is that humans who have been using the fragrant powder for a long time will lose their emotions and humanity, and can only rely on the last animal instinct to survive. With Nai Fenghua's explanation, the history of this world gradually unfolded in front of Guhan. Chapter 931. Guhan noticed that in Nai Fenghua's narration, there were a total of 6 gods. Among them, the first god to appear was the god in the bright moon lake. She appeared in the same era as the 7 ancestors of the radiant city. Guhan knew that this god should be referring to the ship girl, Su Ritian. She was left in this world about 50 years after the apocalypse, which happened to be the period when Kanzu was active, which corresponded to the time of the 7 ancestors. Plus, she lived in the bright moon lake, so this god must be the ship girl, Su Ritian. And the 3 gods that appeared later should refer to Gilgamesh, Artoria, and Yuan Ku, whose name Guhan didn't know. The latter worked together to seal the former, and then built the Radiant Amusement Park, which also corresponded. The only thing that Guhan didn't know was the 2 gods that caused the land of this world to be polluted. These 2 so-called gods also seemed to be Yuan Ku, and their power should be above the peak universe level Yuan Ku like Artoria and Gilgamesh. It was very likely that they were flood level or desolate level Yuan Ku. After experiencing the battle with Gilgamesh, Guhan didn't want to fight with the flood level and desolate level Yuan Ku again. At that time, there wouldn't be a second Kanzu to save him. Since Artoria told them that the seal between the 2 could still last for a long time, Guhan could also temporarily relax. At this time, what Jiyu Han should do was to quickly increase his strength, find his own spirit sword level sword mistress as soon as possible, and let himself become a spirit sword level sword mistress. Unfortunately, this would be at least 3 years later, because Shanhai Pass does not allow the existence of spirit sword level sword mistress. In the following narration of the old man, Guhan's understanding of the Radiant City deepened. According to the old man, in the 10th year of the Radiant Amusement Park's construction, all the land was completely polluted. However, the land in Radiant's Amusement Park was not polluted. Radiant's Amusement Park used a power called the Red Maple Kingdom to protect the land. Therefore, there was a plot of land in the amusement park that could grow normal crops. However, the crops produced by this plot of land were only enough to feed Yuan Ku in the amusement park. There was no way it could supply all the humans. Later, as the days passed, a large number of people became stupid because they had been eating the fragrant powder in the air for a long time. Their lifespan also began to shorten rapidly, and if they maintained a state of stupidity for more than 10 years, their entire brain would completely die, and they would become a true vegetable. Therefore, Guanghui Amusement Park opened its amusement facilities to the humans. After a single ride on the amusement facilities, the humans could regain a little bit of their basic sanity and avoid the danger of brain necrosis. Therefore, the humans here had to go to Guanghui Amusement Park once every 10 years. Otherwise, they would die without a doubt. However, it was unknown whether one should be happy or sad. As long as one practiced this method of qi circulation for a long time and inhaled the fragrant powder in the air, even a newborn baby would learn this method of qi circulation in the womb and be able to rely on the fragrant powder in the air to survive. After giving birth, the mother would also be able to regain her sanity in a short period of time and take care of her child for a few months before returning to the state of a walking corpse. This also ensured that the humans in the Radiant City could continue on, growing from a little over 1,000 people when Guanghui Amusement Park was first established to the current population of 300,000. However, this was undoubtedly a sad thing for the humans in the Radiant City, because they only lived for the sake of living. Apart from that, they couldn't enjoy any happiness or happiness. To them, living like this was no different from dying. When all the humans were about to lose their sanity, the elders of the human tribes felt that they couldn't all become walking corpses. At the very least, there must be a line of people who understood. He was responsible for organizing and recording the history of the entire Radiant City. If it was possible in the future, he wanted to find a way to save all the humans. Therefore, after praying to the gods of Guanghui Amusement Park agreed to provide enough food for one person, ensuring that the Radiant City was a human civilization that could continue on. This was also the reason why Nai Fengbue could maintain his sanity. He was the inheritor of the entire Radiant City, the only human living on normal food. Nai Fengbue's line of inheritance had been passed down for over 700 years. However, his inheritance didn't rely on his bloodline. Nai Fengbue felt that he was reaching the age where he needed to find a new inheritor. Therefore, he would search among the newborn babies in the Radiant City. Once he found an intelligent baby, he would take him in as his disciple and continue on as an inheritor. Because Guanghui Amusement Park only provided food for one person, it was impossible for there to be two inheritors in their prime at the same time. Nai Fengbue could only find a newborn baby when he was old and weak, and his appetite declined. Then, he would teach him for a dozen years. Because the appetite of the old man and the baby was small, the two of them could barely survive on food for one person. I originally went to look for a new inheritor, but I didn't expect to meet you, Lord. Moreover, I just happened to meet this intelligent little girl, 2303. If Lord doesn't mind, I can take this little girl in as my disciple and let her shoulder the mission of my Radiant City's inheritor, Nai Fengbue said as he rubbed 2303's head. That's for the best. Guhan nodded to Nai Fengbue. This was the best outcome. Not only could he let this little girl survive, but he could also guarantee her intelligence and humanity. This made Guhan feel as if there was a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. Lord, I've pretty much told you everything. Then, may I ask you a few questions? Nai Fengbue said with a trembling voice. Of course, I'm more than happy to, Guhan replied. First, I want to confirm something with Lord. You came from the outside world, right? Nai Fengbue's murky eyes revealed a hopeful expression. Evidently, he really hoped that Guhan could give him a definite answer. Yes. We really came from the outside world. Guhan nodded. He knew what Nai Fengbue wanted to ask him, so he very straightforwardly explained the situation of the outside world to him. For example, the so-called gods were not gods, but Yuan Ku who destroyed the world. The humans and Yuan Ku had waged a 1,000-year war, which ultimately formed 8 headquarter cities. The war between humans and Yuan Ku was still ongoing. The humans could only ensure the safety of the headquarter cities. The other regions were still under Yuan Ku's control, and so on. Guhan's words were concise and comprehensive. Very quickly, he told Nai Fengbue about the general situation of the world. However, what made Guhan feel a little strange was that Nai Fengbue didn't reveal a joyful expression after listening to Guhan's narration. On the contrary, he became abnormally silent. This was a very illogical matter. Since Guhan told Nai Fengbue that there was an absolutely safe human city outside, then Nai Fengbue should obviously beg Guhan to think of a way to bring the 300,000 people from the Radiant City to the headquarter cities. Although the journey to the headquarter cities was a little dangerous, and there was a possibility of losing more than 2/3 of the population along the way. But compared to staying in this world as a walking corpse, it was worth a gamble to risk a 1/3 chance of becoming a real human. If Guhan was Nai Fengbue, Guhan would definitely be impatient to beg him to bring the humans from the Radiant City out. He would be able to eat the food that a normal person could eat, and live as a normal person once again. However, the strange thing was that not only did Nai Fengbue not beg Guhan, but he also maintained a long silence, as if he was thinking about something. When Nai Fengbue woke up from his thoughts, he didn't mention the outside world at all, as if the outside world had no attraction to him. This Nai Fengbue is probably hiding something important from me, Guhan saw through Nai Fengbue's thoughts with a glance. However, since Nai Fengbue didn't want to bring the humans out, Guhan was also happy to let it be. Because once the humans here were brought away, the Radiant Amusement Park would definitely be exposed to the eyes of humans. According to the irreconcilable relationship between humans and Yuan Ku, the Yuan Ku here would most likely die in the hands of human sword-bearers. Guhan would personally take care of other Yuan Ku, but this was the home of the Black Tortoise, the place where the Black Tortoise was born and raised, and the amusement park that Artoria had painstakingly built. In addition, the Yuan Ku here had never offended humans, and his hands had not been stained with human blood for hundreds of years. Therefore, Guhan didn't want to see this place destroyed. Apart from this thought, Guhan actually had another thought hidden in his heart. It was just that this thought sounded like a fantasy, so Guhan had never told anyone about it. He just hid it deep in his heart. When Guhan felt that he had enough strength, he would realize his grand plan. To Guhan's plan, the 300,000 people here were like a gift from the heavens. With these 300,000 people, Guhan's plan would be able to solve a huge problem. Therefore, Guhan was more willing to let these 300,000 people stay in the Radiant City for the time being. When he needed them one day, he would personally bring these people out of the Radiant City. Right, I have another question. When your ancestors came to this place, did they bring any books with them? Or did anyone write their life's experiences in a diary or memoir? At the very least, as a human legatee, you should have inherited a lot of history and culture, right? Guhan said with some anticipation. Of course. After all, legatees are used to pass on our history and culture. Although Nai Fengbue was a little surprised and didn't know why Guhan was asking him about this, he still stood up and silently walked to the door of a room behind him. He took out a key and opened the door. Through the door, Guhan could clearly see that there were more than 10 bookshelves in the room, and the bookshelves were filled with all kinds of books. Chapter 932. That's strange. There are tens of millions of people out there, and there are countless super-large libraries with tens of millions of books. Why are you interested in my small library? Nai Fengbue asked curiously as he led Guhan into the library. Since ancient times, humans have been the smartest and the stupidest. Guhan's answer made Nai Fengbue a little confused. Nai Fengbue decided not to think about it. He led Guhan into the library, pointed to the outermost rows of bookshelves, and said, "These are some notes recorded by our inheritors. However, most of them record the stories that happened after we hid in this world. Because all humans are stupid, even if 10 years have passed, there is often nothing worth recording. Therefore, the records here are quite boring. You can take a look if you want, sir. These are the records of our ancestors' knowledge before we entered this world. Some of them are books from before the apocalypse, and some electronic documents. The other major part is the oral narration of our ancestors. When they grow old, they love to tell stories of the past to their descendants. Our descendants recorded these stories and wrote them into this complete set of the new Analects of Confucius." Nai Fengbue explained most of the books in the library to him. "Okay, Leave me here alone. You don't have to stay here and be tired, Guhan said lightly. Nifongwa smiled and walked out of the library obediently, leaving Guhan alone inside. Guhan first flipped through the historical records after the apocalypse recorded by the inheritors. Jiyu Han's reading speed was extremely fast. It only took him about 10 minutes to roughly read through all the records on the entire bookshelf. He found that the whole thing was just like what Nifongwa said. The records were quite boring. Of course, Guhan also found some valuable things. For example, in the oldest manuscript, Guhan saw this description: after the two great gods led more than 50 gods to join the amusement park, the two gods finally decided to leave and look for an unknown place. Before the gods left, I had the honor of meeting the gods and asked them what would happen to poor humans like us after the gods left. Would we be retarded forever? The greater Hoj god told me that our fate will not always be like this. In the distant future, there will be a day of redemption. Before that day comes, all we have to do is wait patiently. Since then, I have never seen the two gods return. I don't know when that day will come. I only hope that we humans can really wait for that day to come. This was all that Guhan was interested in. First of all, the latter used her to describe the two gods, so in addition to Artoria, the other Yuan Ku should also be a woman. The word Ahoj in the record immediately reminded Jiyu Han of Artoria's Erecta Hoj. It seemed that the Yuan Ku who spoke at the end was Artoria. The last and most important point was that Artoria and the last Yuenko had left the Radiant Amusement Park. The last place they disappeared was not here. After all, the Guhan of Amusement Park was built more than 700 years ago, but Artoria was something that happened more than 300 years ago. But at the same time, there was a new problem. After Artoria discovered the dimensional rift more than 700 years ago, not only did she not harm the humans here, but she also helped them to live here. Obviously, Artoria's heart still maintained a clear mind more than 700 years ago and was not controlled by filth. But in the 300 years after that, until her final betrayal, Artoria's hands were stained with human blood. She had killed more than 10,000 humans and more than 100 sword-bearers. She was a world of difference from the benevolent god in the records. Did this mean that Artoria was polluted by filth again after leaving the Guhan of Amusement Park? There was also the problem of Jiyu Black Tortoise. Jiyu Black Tortoise was obviously his and Artoria's child, but when was the seed of this child sown? According to Jiyu Black Tortoise, her life was like that of a normal human child. It took her 18 years to grow from a baby who could not remember anything to the age of 18. When Jiyu Black Tortoise was young, she and Qingpin had squeezed into the same room for a few months. But now, Jiyu Black Tortoise had traveled back to the Age of Destruction. Guhan felt that the timeline was a complete mess when it came to Jiyu Black Tortoise. How many threads of time were entwined around him? Jiyu Black Tortoise, Qingpin, Artoria, and Yi Qing? Even Guhan had a headache just thinking about how many threads of time were entwined around him: Jiyu Black Tortoise, Qingpin, Artoria, and Yi Qing. Well, putting aside the matter of time for the time being, Guhan turned his attention to the precious information that had been preserved before the Age of Destruction. First, Guhan browsed through the books that the humans here had shamelessly called the New Analects of Confucius. This was actually a story told by the 7 ancestors recorded by later generations. It was not on the same level as the Analects of Confucius left behind by that sage. At most, it could be considered an interesting book. Because he was a storyteller, the New Analects of Confucius was not boring at all. On the contrary, it was full of interest and many stories that Guhan had never heard before. For example, there was a story in which a country called Italy participated in a war called World War II. But the soldiers of this country were very interesting. First, a group of soldiers from this country got hungry during the march, so the whole army stopped to cook spaghetti to eat. As a result, because they were not allowed to do anything else while eating spaghetti, the entire army of 10,000 soldiers was captured by a small group of 25 French soldiers. Then, the 25 French soldiers escorted the 10,000 Italian soldiers to the prison camp. Due to a lack of manpower and their unfamiliarity with the terrain, about 2,000 Italian prisoners were separated from the main army. Just when the French soldiers thought that the prisoners would definitely escape, the prisoners finally found them and said that they should have the honor of being prisoners. In the end, the Italian prisoners were imprisoned in the prison camp. After a while, the extremely obedient Italian prisoners actually escaped from the prison. However, they did not escape from the prison to live, but to escape to another prison camp. They heard that the prison camp provided spaghetti as a meal. In other words, they escaped just to change the taste of their food. There was also a story about a great general and leader of North Korea holding a press conference, announcing that North Korea had successfully built a spacecraft to land on the sun. Soon, North Korean astronauts would be able to land on the sun and send back some selfies. The foreign reporter asked the general curiously, "The temperature on the sun is so high. How are you going to land on the sun?" At this time, the general looked at the foreign reporter with disdain. "Are you stupid? We can land on the sun at night." The audience instantly burst into thunderous applause. There were many other interesting stories like this, and even Ji Han couldn't help but laugh out loud. Of course, it could also be seen from these ridiculous materials that most of the stories recorded in the new Analects of Confucius were absurd. However, it was undeniable that there was also some very important information in it. For example, it was the first time that Guhan had completely sorted out the layout of the dynasties of Huaxia from these materials. Some people insisted that the Sui dynasty did not exist. The founding emperor of the Tang dynasty, Li Yuan, was the illegitimate son of Emperor Yang of the Sui dynasty. Therefore, the Tang dynasty and the Sui dynasty were actually the same dynasty. The evidence was a novel called Romance of the Sui and Tang Dynasties. The Sui and Tang dynasties were connected together to mean that they were the same dynasty. The reason why Guhan could be sure of this was that the entire story of the romance of the Sui and Tang dynasties was recorded in the new Analects of Confucius. In addition, historical stories such as Legends of the Eastern Zhou dynasty, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Chuhan's struggle for hegemony, Legend of the Heroes of the Ming dynasty, Legend of the Heroes of the Song dynasty, and so on were all recorded in this way. According to the self-description of one of the ancestors, he was a fan of storytelling. These were all the contents that he had recorded through storytelling. Anyway, through this new Analects of Confucius, Guhan's historical knowledge had improved greatly. To put it bluntly, he had surpassed most of the historians in the world. After reading the new Analects of Confucius, Bu Han couldn't wait to turn his attention to the well-preserved books from before the apocalypse. These were all books from before the apocalypse, and any one of them could easily fetch a price of millions in an auction in a base city. Unfortunately, when Guhan opened these books, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. This was because these books were all one lesson, one practice, 3 years of college entrance examination, 5 years of simulation, and Huanggang's secret scroll. It seemed that the person who kept these books should be a candidate preparing to take the college entrance examination, and a candidate preparing to take the science exam. Otherwise, there should at least be some reference books like history, geography, and politics in these reference books. In the end, after rummaging through the entire library, Guhan did not find any information related to the Qingping sword at all. However, this was also within Guhan's expectations. As the saying goes, the road to happiness is strewn with setbacks. Sooner or later, one would know the truth about the Qingping sword. However, in fact, there was still a piece of information in the library that had not been looked up yet. It was a small black chip the size of a fingernail on the last bookshelf. Guhan recognized this chip. It was said that this was a TF card hidden in a mobile phone. It could record a lot of electronic records, and he might be able to find some useful knowledge. Unfortunately, Guhan did not have a machine that could read this TF card. Therefore, Guhan took this TF card out and proposed to Nai Fengbo that he could take this TF card away and bring it back to the human world for interpretation. It was obvious that Nai Fengbo was very hesitant about Guhan's request. He did not want Guhan to take such a precious thing away. However, he did not dare to directly reject Guhan. After all, Guhan was a powerhouse with strength comparable to a god. If he disobeyed him, he was afraid that only death would await him. "These things are for you." Guhan saw Nai Fengbo's hesitation. Then, Guhan took out all the dry food that could be stored for a long time from his dimensional pocket and placed it in front of Nai Fengbue. This is enough food for you to eat for a lifetime. I will use it to rent this TF card. I promise that I will return here within 10 years and then return this TF card to you, Guhan said solemnly. Okay then. Nai Fengbue swallowed his saliva and finally nodded in agreement. I didn't expect sect leader Tongqian's Qingping sword to actually be in the hands of this lord. Could it be that the time for our radiant city to be freed from this damned fate has finally arrived? Nai Fengbue stared at Guhan's departing figure. Hey, little girl, from today onwards, the two of us will depend on each other. Nai Fengbue touched the little head of 2303, who was constantly waving her hands in an attempt to make Guhan stay. Right, the name 2303 is no longer suitable for you. Let this old man give you a new name according to the rules passed down by our ancestors. You live in the eastern part of the city. The eastern part of the city is filled with the descendants of the Yi clan, one of the 7 ancestors. Since you are so close to this Lord Guhan, and he has the Qingping sword in his hands, then from today onwards, you will treat Yi Qingping well. Fengbue shakes Qingping. Ha 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 ha. Good name, good name. Nai Fengbue laughed happily and raised Yi Qingping high. This little lowly finally had her own real name. Chapter 933. My brother military governor, Miss Ashima has been back for a day. Why are you only back now? I thought you were captured by the Wu people, and they were going to mobilize the entire Taiyin Star garrison to rescue you. Yao Guang said as he put his arm around Guhan's shoulder. As for what he said about mobilizing the entire Taiyin Star garrison to save Guhan, it was basically bullsh*t. Even when Ashima's fate was unknown, Yao Guang dared to mobilize the entire Taiyin Star garrison, let alone for Guhan. Come. Tell me, where did you find Miss Ashima? How did you save her? Yao Guang asked curiously. Didn't Ashima write a report and hand it in? You can read the report yourself. There's no need to ask me. Guhan said coldly. The so-called report was, of course, a report that Guhan, Ashima, and Liuyan Ling had agreed to write. The content was the same. Guhan found Ashima, who was being hunted by the Wu people, in North Korea. Then, Guhan and the Wu people started a huge battle. However, they did not expect to attract the Wu people's great shaman, Xingtian. Guhan could not defeat Xingtian, so he could only escape with Ashima and ask Liuyan Ling for help. Liuyan Ling rushed over at the critical moment and fought off Xingtian. She protected Ashima and left first. Guhan continued to search the North Korean area and only returned a day later when he couldn't find any other survivors. It was a seemingly flawless report. It was a very complete fabrication. You can fool others with a report like this, but you can't fool me, Yao Guang. Yao Guang suddenly became serious. It's fine if you don't want to tell me the truth. You just need to tell me if the truth is a threat to the safety of Shanhaiguan. Whether you believe it or not, this is the truth. Of course, Guhan would not be fooled by Yao Guang's shoddy lies. He insisted that the report was the truth. Since it had Liuyan Ling's signature, Yao Guang could only admit the report with a bitter smile even if he did not believe it. He then patted Guhan's shoulder. All right, I give up. Your rewards have been issued. Go and collect them. The so-called rewards were the quest to find Ashima that Yao Guang had issued. As long as he successfully found Ashima, Guhan would receive 10 million renminbi, 1 million hero coins, and 500,000 merit points as a reward. 10 million renminbi was just a change in the numbers in Guhan's account. What Guhan really cared about was the 1 million hero coins and 500,000 merit points. In the base city's sword-bearer shop, a full set of sword scar imprints cost about 500,000 hero coins. The hero shop in Shanhaiguan was actually cheaper than the hero shop in the base city. It only cost 450,000 to buy a full set of sword scar imprints. A full set of sword scar imprints was required to raise a famed sword maiden to grade 1. It was obviously impossible for Guhan to raise Chijian or Juzi to grade 1. However, Guhan could raise the past water sword to grade 1. Not to mention the strange relationship between Shishui and Guhan, the value of an ancient sword maiden to grade 1 did not mean much to Guhan. Guhan calculated. If he could raise both sword scar imprints, then 1 million hero coins could raise both Chijian and Juzi to grade 3. However, if he gave all of them to one of the sword maidens, then one of them could be raised to grade 2. Not only could sword scar imprints activate the sword maiden's skills, but it could also increase the sword maiden's basic attributes by 10% for every additional grade. A grade 3 sword maiden was equivalent to 2.8 times the attributes of a normal sword maiden. A grade 2 sword maiden was equivalent to 3.1 times the attributes of a normal sword maiden. Although a grade 2 sword maiden's abilities were much better than a grade 3 sword maiden's, it could not activate one more of its basic skills. When considering the use of the yin-yang sword technique, the attributes of 2 grade 3 sword maidens added together were clearly stronger than a grade 2 sword maiden and a grade 9 sword maiden. After a short period of consideration, Guhan used these hero coins to exchange for a sword scar imprint that could raise both Chijian and Juzi swords to grade 3. This way, Guhan would be left with more than 600,000 hero coins in his hands. On the other hand, it was a little awkward for Ji Han to have 500,000 merit points. Because the new sword-bearers had yet to enter Shanhai Pass, the sword-bearers above Guhan were all elite sword-bearers who had survived through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. These sword-bearers had participated in the bitter resistance 5 days ago, and each of them had obtained more than 300,000 hero points on average. Including the hero points they had obtained before, almost all of them had more hero points than Guhan. Therefore, Guhan could only continue to stay in the Shising garrison. However, apart from having a bad name, there were no other disadvantages to this T-Star Guardian mansion. Ji Han did not care about this. After purchasing the sword mark he needed, he returned to the T-Star Guardian mansion that he had been away from for a few days. When Ku Rokin and Leslie Dracula saw that Guhan had returned, they immediately contacted Guhan. After chatting with him for a while, Guhan returned to his lonely state. However, at least Guhan could not sleep that night, because the entire Shising garrison was immersed in endless screams. Unexpectedly, the Chijian sword, which usually looked strong and proud, was weaker than Duyu when it came to the sword scar imprint. It was only slightly stronger than Qing Pin. Although the deep sword wound was extremely painful, a little lowly like Duyu could only shed tears and sob softly. She only let out a cry when the sword was stabbed into her body due to the immense pain. For the rest of the time, she behaved like a little adult and was very strong. However, Chijian was different. Chijian could be said to be the first sword maiden that Zhongheng had. However, due to the separation between the game and reality, it was not Chijian's turn to carve the sword scar imprint. In other words, this was the first time Chijian experienced the pain of a sword scar imprint. Logically speaking, this should not be the first time. When Chijian was the Yu King Go Jian, she had experienced many sword bearers and had experienced the sword scar imprint with them. Logically speaking, she should have gotten used to it by now. However, when Guhan started to carve the sword scar imprint, Chijian screamed like a ghost. Her screams were much more miserable than Qing Pin's. Fortunately, although Chijian screamed miserably, her self-control was much stronger than Qing Pin's. Therefore, Chijian did not cause trouble for Guhan during the sword scar imprint. She only screamed too miserably. When he finally finished carving the sword mark deeply, Ji Han immediately hugged Qi Dian in his arms and silently soothed her trembling skin. Only then did Qi Dian calm down a little. "Is it very painful?" Although Guhan's words were simple, they contained a strong sense of concern. Chijian jumped into Guhan's arms and nodded slightly. "Then how did you get here in the past? Have you never had a deep sword scar before?" Guhan asked with a smile. "Before, what before?" Chijian's answer was a little absent-minded. "I've almost forgotten everything in the past. Ever since I changed into this body, I've become more forgetful than before. Other than the fact that my first sword wielder was Kunzu and that I used to be the king of Yu, Go Jian, I don't have any other memories. Therefore, this sword scar is equivalent to the first deep sword scar in my life. It's good that you forgot. It was best to forget everything that had happened in the past. You are now a brand new sword maiden." Guhan patted King Yu's shoulder. "It's already 3 in the morning, you're screaming so miserably, You should rest early. No. Chijian suddenly jumped out of Guhan's arms and pressed Guhan down on the bed. She used a sticky tone and said coquettishly, "No, I don't know what's going on. I have a special feeling right now, you should at least satisfy me first." With that, Chijian violently pulled apart Guhan's clothes and pounced on Guhan's naked chest. She picked up the pea in front of Guhan's chest and started sucking on it. What's going on? Chijian is much more active than before. This is the first time she took the initiative to do something like this. Could it be that Chijian is actually some kind of strange physique, the type that gets more excited the more painful it is? Guhan didn't have much time to think as Chijian's movements became more and more intense. Her palms even started to move downwards, grabbing towards Guhan's vital parts. "Is it fun to do this?" A voice suddenly rang out in the room, causing Chijian to jump up from Guhan's body. She turned around and saw Juzi, who looked exactly like her, looking at her coldly and curiously. "Juzi, why are you here?" Chijian asked anxiously. "Master said that he wanted to have a deep sword scar with me, so I've been waiting here. Is there a problem?" Juzi asked word by word, leaving Chijian speechless. It was indeed Guhan who pulled the two of them in, saying that they would complete the mission in one night. However, Juzi was too quiet. At the same time, the pain from the deep sword scar made Chijian neglect many things. As a result, she forgot about Juzi and prepared to have a live erotic session with Guhan in front of Juzi. "Juzi, come here, it's your turn to make a deep sword scar." Guhan resolved the awkwardness in time. He pulled Juzi to his bed and began the process of making a deep sword scar on Juzi. Chijian stood at the side thoughtfully and supervised the whole process of Juzi's deep sword scar. It was surprised that the deep sword scar looked like this from a bystander's point of view. On the other hand, Juzi was extremely ashamed. This was because Juzi didn't utter a single word throughout the entire process. She didn't even let out a single tear or groan, let alone scream. However, Chijian had a feeling that this wasn't a good thing. A sword mistress should at least have enough emotions. If a sword mistress didn't even moan in such great pain like Juzi, then this sword mistress was in too much pain. Chapter 934. When Ji Han opened his eyes the next morning, he discovered that he was hugging two identical beautiful sword maidens in each of his arms. "This is Chijian." Guhan looked at the sword lady on the left. "This is Juzi." Guhan looked at the sword lady on the right. After Chijian was reborn, it and Juzi were like twins, as if they were carved from the same mold. Usually, Guhan could only judge them based on the different colors of their clothes. Chijian was wearing golden clothes, while Juzi was wearing black clothes. But now, because these two sword ladies had been making deep sword scars for the whole night, their clothes were already scattered on the ground. Two naked bodies were lying in Guhan's arms, fast asleep. If these two sword ladies spoke, Guhan might be able to judge their identity from their tone of voice. But unfortunately, both of them were in a deep sleep. They had the same delicate face, the same skin color, and even their opie was the same size. This made it difficult for Guhan to quickly judge which was Chijian and which was Juzi. Well, it wasn't like there was no way. Guhan gently touched the opie of the sword lady on the left, and then the opie of the sword lady on the right. Then, he quickly determined that the one on the left was Chijian, and the one on the right was Juzi. The reason was very simple. Chijian's body had already been developed by Guhan, and the pair of opie had become very soft under Guhan's careful care. However, Juzi was still a virgin, so her opie was relatively firm, and it felt a little hard when he pinched it. To make an analogy, Chijian's opie was like a soft orange. On the other hand, Juzi's opie was like a hard apple. That was the difference in the texture. After distinguishing the sword ladies, Guhan didn't continue to fiddle with their perverted hobby of opie. Instead, he entered his consciousness into his purple palace and saw a surging river in his purple palace. This was a river completely composed of sword essence. 4 ancient sword wielders, the sword essence in their bodies was around 100 to 1,000 quarks. The sword essence in their purple palace was extremely sparse, and it was like stars hanging in various parts of the purple palace. If one did not look carefully, they would not be able to sense their sword essence. At the treasure sword level, The sword essence in the body could barely condense into a small ditch. Moreover, the speed at which the sword essence flowed was very slow. However, one could clearly see the sword essence in their Zifu with their own consciousness. When one reached the level of a famed sword wielder, the sword essence in one's body would turn into a cheerful flowing stream, with water constantly splashing from the stream. But now, the sword essence in Guhan's Zifu had turned into a big river, just like the Yangtze River. This was a scene that could only be seen in the Zifu of a spirit sword wielder, which meant that the sword element in Guhan's Zifu had broken through 100,000 quarks. In fact, to be precise, Guhan currently had 430,000 quarks of sword element, which was considered to be at the middle level among spirit sword wielders. This was entirely due to the dedication of Gilgamesh. This was the generous contribution of the universe-level Yuan Ku. Guhan's Chijian sword was able to absorb a total of 800,000 quarks of sword element from his dimensional vortex, and then these 800,000 quarks of sword element were transformed into 420,000 quarks of sword element into Guhan's body. 430,000 quarks of sword element, coupled with Guhan's swordsmanship, it could be said that now, as long as Guhan was equipped with a spirit sword wielder, Guhan would become a spirit sword wielder. Then, Guhan would be able to easily defeat all the spirit sword wielders and become the #1 person among the spirit sword wielders. My ass, #1 person in the spirit sword level. I'm still too weak. Guhan instantly threw this idea to the back of his mind, and at the same time, burst into a bitter smile. Guhan could not help but recall his battle with Gilgamesh. In that battle, he was nothing more than a toy for Gilgamesh to toy with. Although Gilgamesh used absolute strength to suppress Guhan, Guhan actually had several opportunities to hit Gilgamesh. Unfortunately, Guhan did not see the location of Gilgamesh's dimensional node from the beginning to the end. Otherwise, Guhan could also borrow the characteristics of the Chijian sword and directly send Gilgamesh back to the dimensional vortex. However, even if he defeated Gilgamesh because of the dimensional node, it could not be considered as a righteous path. It was just that the characteristics of the Chijian sword were too awesome. In his heart, Guhan faintly hoped that he could defeat Gilgamesh with his swordsmanship. Originally, Guhan thought that under the absolute suppression of strength, no matter how excellent his swordsmanship was, it would be useless. However, it was not until Kanzu appeared and used the marvelous harmonious stream of flowing goblets that Guhan suddenly realized that swordsmanship was not completely useless under the absolute suppression of strength. Rather, it was because Guhan's swordsmanship was not high enough. He had not even reached 1/10 of the realm of the harmonious stream of flowing goblets. Guhan felt that if he could master the harmonious stream of flowing goblets, he would not be in such a difficult situation like before. He might even be able to maintain a 50-50 situation with Gilgamesh for a period of time. Under the circumstances of Green Lotus White Root Body and Yin Yang Sword Secret Art, Guhan was even confident that he could suppress Gilgamesh. As long as Guhan could suppress Gilgamesh, Guhan could find a way to find the dimensional node that Gilgamesh had hidden, and then send Gilgamesh home with one sword strike. This way, he would not need Kanzu to save him, and Jiyu Xuanwu would not be pushed back by Kanzu. Have I been too complacent during this period of time? Guhan carefully crawled up from his bed and turned to stare at the two soundly asleep sword ladies. He could not help but reflect in his heart, did I think that my swordsmanship was already strong enough? Did I think that my swordsmanship was invincible in the world? Ever since I became a sword wielder, I seem to have become arrogant. I have been immersed in improving the essence of the sword or other external things, but I have neglected the swordsmanship that was the foundation of my life. The number of times I have practiced has not even reached a third of the time before I became a sword wielder. Other than creating a small portion of the Chaos Sword technique, I have not made any other improvements. I have really lost myself. Guhan fell into self-reflection. However, from a certain point of view, Guhan had been too harsh on himself. The reason why the number of times Guhan practiced his swordsmanship had decreased wasn't because he was slacking off, but because he had many more things to consider. In the past few months, Guhan had either been in a harsh battle or thinking about the chaotic timeline in an attempt to unravel the various mysteries surrounding him. Forget it, there wasn't much to explain. Guhan's swordsmanship training was indeed inferior to the past. No matter how righteous the reason was, it was the truth. No, I can't continue being so lazy. I have to return to the state of arduous training from before. Guhan clenched his fists and left his bedroom. When he passed by the other sword ladies' bedrooms, he realized that Qingpin and Duyu were still sleeping. Yi Tian was nowhere to be seen, and only Shishui was sitting quietly in her room, deep in thought. Do you have time? Guhan pushed open Shishui's door and asked softly. Yes. Shishui seemed surprised that Guhan would actually take the initiative to appear in her room. This was the first time Guhan had stayed with her in her room since she moved into the Guardian's mansion. I want to practice my swordsmanship. Can you help me? Guhan extended his hand to the past water sword. So you want to practice your swordsmanship with me? Shishui smiled bitterly in her heart. It seemed that she had thought too much. To the entire team, she was still an extremely awkward existence. Sure. Shishui replied calmly. She took the initiative to return the sword to Guhan's hand and changed back to its sword form. Guhan held the past water sword and came to the open space outside the Guardian's mansion. He began to practice the swordsmanship that he had mastered, from the 9 swords of mysterious heaven to the chaos swordsmanship, as well as some small routines that Guhan had figured out himself. Guhan practiced for a few hours. However, when Guhan finished practicing, he did not look happy. This was because Guhan realized that after practicing for a few hours, he realized that he had not improved at all. He was only repeating these movements mechanically. No, I can't continue practicing like this. It won't have any effect. Guhan stopped what he was doing when he thought of this. He took a deep breath to calm himself down and once again carefully thought about the problem of his swordsmanship. It seems that I was a little extreme just now. The reason why my swordsmanship cannot improve is not because I have neglected to practice, but because the 9 swords of mysterious heaven can only reach the limit of swordsmanship. Only a new and stronger swordsmanship can allow my swordsmanship to continue improving. Guhan changed his train of thought and immediately felt his vision brighten. At the same time, the harmonious stream of flowing goblets that Kunzu had used before flashed through Guhan's mind. Then, Guhan began to imitate Kunzu's sword. This imitation lasted for a full 7 to 8 hours. It was only when the entire world entered deep into the night that Guhan abruptly broke out of this state. A woo. Guhan suddenly let out a long howl that could shake the entire world. Then, his entire body suddenly turned into a stream of light and began to brandish his sword. Sword of the abyss. Sword of slaughter. Sword of the heavens. Sword of tranquility. Chaos splitting heavens. Guhan practiced from the 9 swords of mysterious heaven all the way to the chaos swordsmanship that he created. Originally, Guhan's chaos swordsmanship only had one ultimate move, chaos splitting heavens. Logically speaking, after using this move, Guhan's matter should end. However, Guhan's body was still brandishing his sword. Moreover, his swordsmanship gradually became like the starry sky. Although Guhan was clearly only the size of a person, his sword's momentum seemed to cover the entire starry sky. No matter where he was, he could be attacked by Guhan at any time. After practicing this move to the extreme, Guhan finally stopped. His clothes were already drenched in sweat. From now on, this move will be called Chaos Stars. Ji Han gave a brand new name to the moves in his newly created Chaos Swordsmanship. A satisfied smile finally appeared on Guhan's face. After creating the Chaos Stars, Guhan discovered that his swordsmanship was vaguely climbing to a higher level. If he could create the complete Chaos Swordsmanship, then his swordsmanship would definitely reach a brand new peak. At that time, it would not be impossible for him to compete with Kunzu's swordsmanship. Chapter 935. After his breakthrough on the first day, Guhan felt powerless over the next few days. This was because Ji Han realized that if he wanted to further improve his swordsmanship, he had to perfect the entire chaos swordsmanship. However, after creating the Chaos Stars, Guhan discovered that he had used up all of his accumulated knowledge. He could not improve the chaos sword style no matter how much he practiced. Guhan tried to recall the usage of the harmonious stream of flowing goblets from Kunzu, But it was a pity that the sword style gradually faded from Guhan's memory after he mastered the Chaos Stars. In the end, Guhan seemed to have completely forgotten how to use the sword style. Looks like I'll have to figure it out in actual combat. Guhan knew that he could no longer perfect the Chaos Sword style by himself. Guhan decided to use his 200,000 achievement points to exchange for 40 days of vacation from the Taiyin Star garrison. He then left the Shising garrison with the past water sword in hand, and ventured deep into the Wu people's territory with his sword maidens. A few days later, the Wu people were spreading a strange rumor. A human had barged into the Wu people's territory, and had taken the initiative to provoke the Wu people's tribes. He fought against the intermediate sorcerers of the Wu people, and defeated many of the elite intermediate sorcerers of the Wu people. Initially, there was no need for the rumor to spread. There was no shortage of fearless human swordsmen since ancient times, and such swordsmen would usually be able to act arrogantly for a while. However, when the Wu people's army surrounded the swordsmen, they could only choose to be surrounded and beaten to death. Of course, the swordsmen with the surname Liu Nian were an exception. However, according to the rumor, the audacious human did not command his sword maidens like the other swordsmen. Instead, he fought with the sword maidens in his hands. This was just a strange thing. What was even more strange was that when this human was fighting against the sorcerer tribe, he never used the power of the stars transformed from sword essences. He completely relied on his own body and sword techniques to fight against the sorcerer tribe. The strangest thing was that the sword-bearer, a piece of trash without the power of the stars, had defeated over 100 intermediate sorcerer tribe warriors in a row. He had even slaughtered a small tribe under the Dijiang tribe. Over 40 intermediate sorcerers in the tribe had all died. This completely shattered the worldview that the Wu people had built up over the centuries. Even the bloodline of the Liu Nian family could not do this. Was the swordsman really human? Of course, the sorcerer tribe would not allow themselves to be provoked like this. Hence, under the organization of a few sorcerers, almost all the sorcerer tribes in the area where the swordbearer was active joined forces. The entire team was led by a heaven sorcerer, and together with hundreds of medium sorcerers and thousands of junior sorcerers, they launched an endless hunt for the damned human. Lord Heaven Wizard, we've found the human target. Just now, a small troop of warriors reported seeing a human man eating on the grey iron plain. He looks exactly like the human described, reported a warrior to the Heaven Wizard. Good. Your scouts will hide where they are. Do not attract this human's attention. Then, the Dijiang warriors will surround him from the back, the Hu-Tu warriors from the front, the Xianming warriors from the left, and the Gonggong warriors from the right. When all the warriors are in position, we will send this damned human to hell. Under the command of the Heaven Wizard, a tight encirclement was formed around Guhan. After the Heaven Wizard confirmed that the last possible escape route had been blocked by the Wu people's warriors, the Heaven Wizard probably felt that this human would not be able to escape. Thus, he ordered all the hidden Wu people's troops to show themselves and formally surround and kill this human. With the Heaven Wizard taking the lead, the Wu people's encirclement kept shrinking, and soon, Guhan was trapped in a small circle with a diameter of only a few meters. Outside the circle were all Wu people. As far as the eye could see, the end of the Wu people's troops could not be seen. However, in the Heaven Wizard's imagination, when his troops surrounded this human, he would either tremble in fear or yell at the Wu people crazily. This human would either tremble in fear, or scream at the Wu people crazily to hide the fear in his heart, or vent the madness in his heart. However, this human in front of him did not make a sound. His expression did not even change. He just watched as he was surrounded, as if he was not surrounded by thousands of Wu people, but by thousands of kittens. This made the Heaven Wizard angry, but also a little curious. He wondered why this human was so daring and so calm. Human, tell me your name. After the Wu people surrounded Guhan, they did not immediately attack him. Instead, they started to ask for Guhan's name like a battle between generals. My name. Guhan revealed a surprised expression. This was the first time his expression changed. Since when do you Wu people ask for your opponent's name before a battle? I don't remember you people having this habit. Me. Of course, we are not interested in knowing the name of an ordinary human. The Heaven Wizard raised his head proudly. But you are different. You can actually defeat so many powerful warriors without using that T-star power. With your strength, you already have the right to leave your name in the records of the shaman tribe. Once you die, we will follow the traditions of you humans and dig a hole for you. We will fill it with soil and finally erect a tombstone with your name on it. This can be considered a reward for your strength. Oh, should I thank you? Ji-Han looked at the Heaven Shaman with interest. That's right. Guhan's gaze made the Heaven Wizard very uncomfortable. He twisted his body uncomfortably. He then recalled Guhan's performance and asked curiously again, Human, you should have discovered our encirclement long ago, right? That's right. Guhan nodded. It's time for your scouts to lose some weight. Although they are lying on the ground, their fat butts are higher than the sky. How can I not see them? Then why didn't you escape? The Heaven Wizard was even more curious. With your strength, you should be able to escape before our encirclement is formed. Why should I escape? Guhan seemed to have heard something strange. Because only death awaits you if you don't escape. Tian Wu shouted in a stern voice. Only death awaits you. Only death awaits you. In order to match the Heaven Wizard's words, the surrounding Wu people raised their weapons at the same time and let out a roar. The roar of hundreds and thousands of Wu people seemed to be able to pierce through the sky. The entire world shook along with the roar. Ordinary people would have been scared out of their wits when they saw this scene. They might have even knelt down. Let me return those words to you. You are the ones who will die if you come here. Guhan was not frightened by this situation. Instead, he smiled indifferently. The Heaven Wizard was deeply provoked by Guhan's smile. He no longer had any interest in talking to Guhan. He raised his hand high and pressed it down. The impatient Wu people immediately rushed forward and fought with Guhan. The Heaven Wizard did not attack immediately. Instead, he hovered in the air and observed the battle silently. Very soon, the Heaven Wizard realized that things were just as the rumors said. This human did not use the power of the stars. He only relied on an ordinary sword mistress to fight the Wu people. In this situation, even the strongest sword mistress, the guardian of the sun or the moon, should have been torn to pieces by the frenzied Wu people. However, this was not the case. It was not this human who was being torn to pieces, but the powerful Wu people warriors. Although these warriors were all junior Magi, even if they were junior Magi, their strength was still a few times greater than that of ordinary human beings. More importantly, these warriors had a wealth of battle experience. After a long period of reincarnation, these warriors had honed their skills in close combat. Coupled with the fact that the sorcerer tribe was not afraid of death, they could often kill ancient sword-bearers who had an advantage in terms of strength and were scared shitless. Besides, among these junior Magi, there were some more powerful intermediate Magi. Every intermediate Magi's physical strength was a few times greater than a junior Magi's, and every intermediate Magi was able to exchange a few moves with a famous swordswoman. Before they set off, the Heaven Wizard saw the troops he led and felt that he might have made a mountain out of a molehill. The next human sword mistress would not need such a strong army. But when the battle really started, the Heaven Wizard began to regret not bringing more people with him. The fearless junior wizards were as weak as cabbages in a vegetable field under the sword of this human sword mistress. With a swing of the sword, 5 or 6 junior wizards were cut in half at the same time. They turned into blood essence and returned to Zhu Wu's blood essence. As for the intermediate warlocks, although the human was unable to kill them instantly, every time he attacked with his sword, he was extremely cunning, hitting the weakest parts of the intermediate warlocks. After 5 or 6 strikes, an intermediate warlock would die under the human's sword. What was even more infuriating was that the human's movements were extremely graceful. He was clearly being attacked by a few or even a dozen sorcerer tribe warriors at the same time, but his body was like the body of a snake, able to weave through the shadows of the swords. The attacks of the sorcerer tribe warriors could not even touch the human's body. Instead, because of the short moment of paralysis caused by the attacks, the human took their lives with a backhand. The Heaven Wizard only watched for a few dozen seconds before he felt that he could not watch any longer. Instead, he picked up his weapon and joined in the attack on Guhan. I won't kill you. Go. There were only 2 people left on the battlefield. One was Guhan, and the tip of his sword was pressed against his opponent's throat. The other was the Heaven Wizard who had just spoken to Guhan. Why? Why don't you kill me? Are you looking down on me? The Heaven Wizard was extremely angry that Guhan did not kill him. No. I just want you to pass a message for me, Guhan said calmly. What message? The Heaven Wizard asked subconsciously. Go tell your great wizard. Guhan looked at the messy battlefield around him. Don't send these useless witch tribe members to their deaths. They don't even have the right to train my sword skills. Chapter 936. When he saw that Heaven Witchcraft's figure gradually disappearing from his line of sight, Guhan was caught off guard and fell to the ground. Although Guhan had killed thousands of Wu people in an awe-inspiring manner and even captured the Heaven Wizard in the end, Guhan had actually exhausted his physical strength to the limit. However, Guhan had actually overdrawn his physical strength to the limit. Without using the power of the stars, it was already a miracle that Guhan was able to last until now. Not bad, the effect of this training is not bad. I have some ideas about the next steps of the chaos swordsmanship. After catching his breath, Guhan mumbled to himself helplessly. Although the battle just now had exhausted Guhan's physical strength, it had also allowed Guhan to have some ideas about the chaos swordsmanship. At the same time, Guhan also had new ideas about how to perfect this swordsmanship. I hope I'll meet a stronger opponent next time. The Wu people's encirclement on Guhan was still going on, but the Wu people's encirclement was getting bigger and bigger. This was also what Guhan was looking forward to. The second encirclement by the Wu people was much smarter. They directly abandoned the junior wizard Wu people. The top strength of the team had expanded to 10 Heaven Wizards. The core strength had become 300 intermediate wizards. It seemed to be 1/3 less than the first encirclement, but the actual combat strength had increased by more than 5 times. Therefore, the second encirclement ended with the victory of the Wu people. After fighting for more than 10 minutes and killing more than 50 intermediate wizards, Guhan was forced to exhaust all his physical strength by the Heaven Wizard. He knelt on one knee and could only use his sword to support his body. Just as the Heaven Wizard was about to end this damned human's life, Guhan suddenly took out a droplet flying ship and quickly escaped from the encirclement by the Wu people. Therefore, in the third encirclement, the Wu people brought the Wu people of the Dejiang tribe who were good at archery. They were ready to shoot down the damned vehicle when Guhan took out the droplet flying ship to escape. But it was useless. The surface of the droplet flying ship seemed to be made of some special material. The arrows of the Wu people didn't cause much damage to the droplet flying ship and couldn't stop it from escaping. What was worse was that Guhan only escaped after killing 100 intermediate wizards in the third encirclement. He killed twice as many intermediate wizards as he did in the second encirclement. Didn't this mean that Guhan's strength had doubled? This was proven during the fourth encirclement. This time, Guhan killed 150 intermediate wizards before escaping. Moreover, Guhan deliberately killed all the intermediate wizards of the Dejiang tribe before leaving in the droplet flying ship. Then came the fifth encirclement. After losing more than 300 intermediate wizards, the Wu people finally learned their lesson. They couldn't even bear to send their intermediate wizard warriors into the battlefield. They sent out a super team of 50 heaven wizards to engage in a battle with Guhan that lasted for half an hour. Apart from the 50 heaven wizards who fought Guhan directly, another 20 heaven wizards from the Gomang tribe cast a flight restriction spell and completely sealed off the airspace around the battlefield. This prevented Guhan from escaping using the droplet flying ship. In the eyes of these heaven wizards, Guhan was destined to be unable to escape this time. Unfortunately, reality still slapped them in the face. This time, Guhan didn't engage in a tug-of-war with them like he usually did. Instead, he used an explosive sword move that resembled starlight and killed 3 heaven wizards on the spot. Then, he took advantage of a gap in the encirclement to kill his way out. Then, he quickly killed a Gomang heaven wizard who was maintaining the flight restriction spell, causing it to lose its effectiveness. Then, he once again escaped the battlefield in the droplet flying ship. Then came the 6th, 7th, 8th. By the 12th time, the Wu people's expressions had changed at the mention of Guhan. The Wu people didn't even dare form a team to encircle and kill Guhan, because this fellow would definitely find a way to escape. Even more terrifying was that this human's sword technique seemed to improve after each encirclement. During the second encirclement, the 300 intermediate wizards were able to force Guhan to escape. However, during the 12th encirclement, the Magi had mobilized all the 300 heaven Magi they could muster to carry out the encirclement, but they still lost 5 heaven Magi. Then, they allowed Guhan to escape without any way to stop him. At that moment, the Wu people came to a realization. The fundamental goal of the other party's provocation wasn't to go crazy like a fool, but to use the Wu people to hone his sword technique. Although this discovery allowed the Wu people to discover the truth, it also made the Wu people feel disgusted, as though they had eaten a rat's feces. Since when did the Wu people, who could make the entire human race tremble, become a sharpening stone for the other party to hone his sword technique? It was truly tragic for the Wu people to live to this stage. Therefore, the Wu people decided not to form a team to encircle and kill Guhan, lest his strength continued to rise. They only ordered the smaller tribes under the major tribes to move closer to the major tribes. The 12 tribes lived in groups. This way, Guhan wouldn't be able to break through the tribes' defenses. They were completely avoiding battle. At the same time, Guhan felt that the Wu people's reaction was very strange. According to Guhan's estimation, by the 8th encirclement, the Wu people should have known that the heaven wizard Wu people wouldn't be able to kill Guhan. Only a great wizard could kill Guhan. However, from the beginning to the end, Guhan didn't see a single great wizard attack. It was as if the 12 great wizards among the Wu people had disappeared. It wouldn't be a big deal if they had simply disappeared. It wasn't a bad thing for great wizards to disappear. What Guhan was truly worried about was that the great wizards hadn't disappeared, but were secretly hiding somewhere and plotting something. During this period of time, Guhan had killed over 20 heaven wizards, over 300 intermediate wizards, and over 1,000 junior wizards. This wasn't a small number. It was almost equivalent to 1/10 of the Wu people's strength after the battle. Such a huge loss was enough for the great wizards to chase after Guhan. But in fact, these great Magi did not do anything. If they were really plotting something, then it must be a huge plot, so huge that these great Magi would rather give up 1/10 of their power than give up on their plan. Looks like I need to inform the Yaoguang and ask them to pay attention to the Wu people's recent movement. Guhan thought to himself. At the same time, he started to pack his belongings and prepared to return to the Xising garrison. He had been out for 38 days, and only had 2 days left of the leave he had taken. Moreover, from the 10th battle onwards, Guhan realized that this kind of battle was no longer able to improve his strength by much. In the following 11th and 12th battles, Guhan's strength was stagnant. Moreover, after fighting for 38 days, Guhan's spirit had reached a very tired state. It was time for him to return to the Guardian residence and have a good sleep. He believed that after this mess, the Wu people, who had suffered heavy losses, wouldn't have the guts to attack the Guardian residence again. When he returned to the Guardian residence once again, Guhan noticed that the entire Guardian residence had become much livelier. The Guardian residence, which had been deserted for a long time, was once again occupied by various human buildings. From time to time, teams of ancient sword-bearers could be seen patrolling the Guardian residence. Originally, only 3 guest Guardian residences under the Sanshuian garrison that Guhan was in had their own Guardian residences. The other 3 guest Guardian residences didn't have their own Guardian residences and were left empty. But now, these 3 guest Guardian residences already had their own Guardian residences, and these Guardian residences were on their respective thrones. Previously, none of the Guardian residences had been equipped with ancient sword-bearers. In the Xising garrison, Guhan had been a lone commander without any subordinates. However, this time, when Guhan returned to the territory of the Shi*T planet Guardian residence, he discovered that there were 18 ancient sword-rank swordbearers in his territory. According to the Shi*T planet Guardian residence, there would only be 18 ancient sword-rank swordbearers in the Shi*T planet Guardian residence when it was full. Obviously, his guardian residence had already replenished its ancient sword rank guardian residence. It seems like the Sword Committee and the Shanghai Pass Management Committee must have been terrified. I'm afraid that the shamans will really break through the great cycle of stars formation. Or else, the Sword Committee headquarters will have to put in a lot of effort to fill all the 10,000 sword bearers in Mountain Sea Pass in just a short period of around 40 days. Jiyu Han was surprised that there were 18 new ancient sword rank swordbearers in his guardian mansion. But on the other hand, these ancient sword rank swordbearers were also surprised that they could finally see their own guardian mansion. To be honest, these ancient sword bearers were filled with resentment towards Gu Han. First of all, these ancient sword bearers had been forcefully transferred to Shanghai Pass by the Sword Committee, and they were already filled with resentment. Everyone knew that Shanghai Pass was a place of death. Moreover, the details of the tragic battle in Shanghai Pass had also been published on the internet. More than 8,000 people had been killed, and every ancient sword bearer who had been forcibly transferred to Shanghai Pass was terrified. They felt that they would not be able to return to the base city alive. Secondly, there was the name of this guardian residences. The name of the Shi-Sing garrison made these ancient sword bearers feel disgusted. Since there were no new names for the Shi-Sing garrison, these ancient sword bearers all had the title of Town Defender of Sh*T* above their heads. When these small guardians of Sh*T* met other guardians, they wanted to find a hole to hide in. Even if the other party did not mention anything related to Sh*T*, these ancient sword bearers could feel that the other party was mocking them in their hearts. Finally, there was the resentment towards Jiyu Han, the Sh*T* guardian. Other famed sword-level guardians would console their ancient sword-tier swordbearers and teach them some survival techniques in Mountain Pass. Finally, they would even give out some sword mark imprints or RMB to their subordinates to buy their hearts. However, his guardian had actually taken a 40-day-long leave in one go. From the moment these ancient sword-bearers were assigned to Sh*T*, they did not even know what their guardian residences looked like or what their guardian residences looked like, let alone receive any benefits from him. When these resentments were added together, they became extremely powerful. The resentments of the first two could not be vented on the Sword Council or the Great Yingard Manor, so in the end, they could only vent it on the unlucky Jiyu Han. Therefore, when Gu Han first appeared in the Shi-Sing garrison, these ancient sword-bearers immediately gathered at the entrance of the guardian residences, ready to pounce on their superior. At the very least, they wanted to force him to give them a lot of benefits. Chapter 937. As soon as he returned to the guardian's residence and was about to take a good rest to replenish the energy he had expended in the battle with the Wu people, Gu Han was suddenly woken up by a commotion at the door. When Jiyu Han opened the door, he saw more than 10 humans blocking his door, shouting something. Jiyu Han looked like a labor contractor surrounded by migrant workers who wanted to pay his wages. After listening for a while, Jiyu Han finally understood what these sword-bearers were saying. It turned out that these sword-bearers were accusing him of being irresponsible. He had disappeared for more than 30 days in one go, and he did not even do what a superior should do to welcome a newcomer. The newcomers could only miserably learn the rules of Shanghai Pass from the other guardians' residences. Besides that, these ancient sword-rank swordbearers were also complaining that Gu Han did not protect them. Other guardians' residences had famed swordbearers protecting them, but they could only rely on themselves. For example, they said that 20 days ago, the Wu people had suddenly launched a surprise attack on the guardians' residence. In the end, the other guardians' residences had all survived the crisis under the leadership of their respective famed swordbearers. Only the 18 ancient sword-rank swordbearers did not have the protection of the famed swordbearers. In the end, 4 intermediate sorcerers from the Wu people killed their way into the Poop Star. If not for the fact that these 18 ancient sword-rank swordbearers had worked together and helped each other, they would have suffered many casualties. In short, these ancient sword-rank swordbearers were constantly complaining to Gu Han. They were complaining that Gu Han had not done his duty. "All right. I understand what you all mean." Gu Han, who was feeling a splitting headache, waved his hand and said gently. Unfortunately, these ancient sword-rank swordbearers did not appreciate it and continued to complain. "Shut up. A ray of sword chi flew out of Guhan's hand and flew past the noses of these 18 ancient sword-rank swordbearers. The noisy scene suddenly became silent. These ancient sword-rank swordbearers suddenly realized that their superior's temper was not as good as they had thought. I ask a question, and you answer it. Otherwise, I will move him to the outer area to guard. Guhan's words caused the atmosphere among the ancient sword-wielders, who had been united just a moment ago, to become a little strange. The outer area was naturally more dangerous, and the chances of death were higher. Naturally, none of these ancient sword-rank swordbearers were willing to guard the outer area. You are abusing your position. You can't do this. An ancient sword-tier swordsman who looked to be in his 20s blamed himself. Generally speaking, there were two types of swordsmen who came to Shanghai Pass. One was the ancient sword-rank swordbearers who were old and had no potential to advance. The other was the young sword-rank swordbearers who were extremely talented. The former were sent here as worthless consumables, while the latter were sent here as training targets. Regardless of whether it was an ancient or famed sword wielder, they all had to follow this rule. This 20-year-old ancient sword-rank swordbearer had been sent to Shanghai Pass because he was extremely talented. Therefore, he had his own arrogance. Unfortunately, his arrogance was nothing in front of Guhan. Guhan did not believe that there was anyone more talented than him in this world. You need proof to speak. What proof do you have that I am abusing my position to take revenge? Guhan asked the young man. You said it yourself. If I ask a question, you will answer it. Otherwise, I will move him to the outermost area to guard. If this is not abusing your position to take revenge, what is? The young man said loudly, as if Guhan's words were abominable. Didn't your teacher tell you when you were young that you have to raise your hand first to answer a question? Lung Qingqiu's words caused the young man's face to turn red. I am your superior. It is natural for me to ask and you to answer. It is also natural for you to maintain the necessary respect for me. This is a rule that must be obeyed everywhere. Am I not your superior? The rest of the ancient sword-rank swordbearers immediately lowered their heads and dared not say another word. Otherwise, they would be labeled by Guhan as the classic example of disrespecting one's superior. I hereby announce that from now on, you are responsible for guarding Shit Planet Sector 1. You are not allowed to leave New Sector 1 without my order. When he heard that Guhan had assigned him to Sector 1, the young man immediately became listless. Sector 1 was the outermost sector of Shit Planet. If the Wu people really launched an attack, then Sector 1 would definitely be the first sector that the Shising garrison would take a beating. Seeing that this unlucky bastard had decided his tragic fate with a single sentence, the other ancient sword-rank swordbearers dared not say a word. I know what you want to say. I also admit that it is very inappropriate for me to ignore you for more than 30 days. However, Shanghai Pass has never had a rule that a superior must be responsible for receiving and guiding newcomers. So remember, if you have any ideas, please write me a written report or send me an email. If anyone dares to gather in front of my door and make a ruckus again, I will have him take that unlucky bastard's place. Finally, I heard that you want to ask for benefits from me. Sure, I will give you benefits right now. Hearing that Guhan was going to give them benefits, all the ancient sword-rank swordbearers looked up in unison. They wanted to know what kind of benefits this overbearing and arrogant superior was going to give them. My benefits are the best in the entire Shanghai Pass. No one in the entire Shanghai Pass can give you better benefits than me. Although these ancient sword-rank swordbearers thought that Guhan was bragging, it did not stop them from continuously raising their expectations for the benefits. Would this Shit Planet's guardian give everyone a set of sword mark or something like that? Yes. Guhan pronounced the word with emphasis. Then, he added, this is the benefit I am giving you. Yes. What kind of benefit is this? Do you think we will lose our lives just by standing here? The ancient sword-rank swordbearers were confused and could not understand what Guhan was thinking. All right, let's go. I'm tired. After saying this, Guhan turned around and returned to the Guardian's mansion. With a loud bang, he closed the door of the Guardian's mansion. He no longer cared about these ancient sword-rank swordbearers. Let's go, let's go. The ancient sword-rank swordbearers were no longer in the mood to cause a ruckus. They could only go back to their homes and find their mothers. They could not stop thinking about the meaning of this inexplicable benefit called life. Unfortunately, they could not find the answer during their time in Shanghai Pass. It was only when they collectively left Shanghai Pass and returned to the human world that they suddenly realized what the answer meant. Guhan slept for 2 days and 2 nights to completely recover his strength. Then, he brought the mission token to the Taiyin Star Garrison. He found the intelligent system of the Taiyin Star Garrison and exchanged all the records in the mission token for hero coins and merit points. This was not the same mission token that Guhan had received when he accepted the mission to find Ashima. The previous mission token had already been given to the Taiyin Star Garrison when he was exchanging the mission rewards. This was the daily mission token that Guhan had reapplied for after taking a leave of absence. The daily mission token needed to be worn at all times. It was purely used to record the number of Wu people killed. This was because as long as one killed Wu people, even if one did not receive the mission, one would still receive a certain amount of hero coins and merit points as a reward. A minor sorcerer Wu people could receive 100 hero coins and 10 merit points as a reward. A intermediate sorcerer Wu people could receive 1,000 hero coins and 100 merit points as a reward. The heaven sorcerer level was 10 times higher than the intermediate sorcerer level. However, it was different for the senior sorcerer level. The reward for the senior sorcerer level was 100 times higher than the heaven sorcerer level. This meant that as long as one killed a senior sorcerer, one would receive a huge reward of 1 million hero coins and 100,000 merit points. According to the mission token, Guhan had killed a total of 1,121 minor sorcerers, 321 intermediate sorcerers, and 24 heaven sorcerers in the past 38 days. In total, Guhan would receive 673,100 hero coins and 67310 merit points as a reward. With these hero coins, Guhan realized that the current amount of hero coins he had was enough to upgrade his 2 famed sword ladies to the 2nd grade. However, after some consideration, Guhan decided to save these hero coins for now. Once he had accumulated 2,200,000 hero coins, he would upgrade his Chijian sword ladies to the 1st grade. A famed sword lady who had activated her ultimate skill was much stronger than 2 2nd-grade sword ladies. At the end of the month, the Taiyin Star Garrison started to take stock of the hidden hero coins for the entire month. They were shocked to find out that the amount of hero coins spent this month was 2 times higher than the average of the other months. In other words, the amount of hero coins that Guhan had exchanged for this month was equivalent to the amount of hero coins that the other swordbearers of the Taiyin Star Garrison had obtained in 2 months. Since Guhan had exchanged the rewards through a smart computer, the Taiyin Star Garrison Management Office had no idea who had exchanged so many hero coins. Only Yao Guang, who had received the report, could not help but smile. Apart from Guhan, no one else in the entire Taiyin Star Garrison could do this. However, most of the Guardians were not interested in the abnormal amount of hero coins. What they were interested in was that their lives had suddenly become happy and carefree in the past few months. In the past, the Wu people would launch at least 5 probing attacks on the human defense line. Each attack would result in the deaths of at least 10 unlucky swordbearers. But now, 3 months had passed and the sorcerer tribe had not launched a single attack. The defense line of the Guardian's mansion had been quiet for 3 whole months, which was a rare sight. During this period of time, not a single sword-bearer had died while defending. Later on, according to the sword-bearers who were scouting around the territory of the Wu people, all the smaller tribes of the Wu people had gathered around the bigger tribes. These tribes were heavily guarded and were staring nervously at the outside world as if a terrifying enemy would attack them at any time. The nervous expressions of the Wu people were exactly the same as the expressions of the sword-bearers hiding behind the defense line. While the Guardians were confused by the Wu people, only Ku Rokin and Leslie Dracula who were around Guhan realized that ever since Guhan returned from his vacation, he had not appeared in front of anyone for 3 months. It was as if he had disappeared from the world. Chapter 938. So where did Guhan go? The answer was that Guhan had been staying in his room in the House of Guardians and had not gone out at all. Or rather, he had not gone out for the past 3 months. Guhan had spent all his time lying in bed, staying in Sword Maiden Online through the game capsule. Yes, that's right. For the past 3 months, Guhan had been staying in Sword Maiden Online. The reason was very simple. Guhan wanted to find Kanzu, or rather, find Kanzu's sword soul. After exchanging the hero coins that day, Guhan had been thinking about how he could further improve his swordsmanship. There was a limit to how much he could improve his swordsmanship by fighting against the Sorcerer Tribe. In the end, the Sorcerer Tribe members at the level of Heaven Sorcerer Tribe had no effect on Ji Han. Perhaps he could only gain something from fighting the Sorcerer Tribe members at the level of Great Sorcerer Tribe. However, the problem was that he did not know where all the great wizards of the Wu people were hiding. Even if they allowed their clansmen to be slaughtered by Guhan, they would not come out to face Guhan. In desperation, Guhan could only give up the idea of fighting with the great wizards and look for other ways to improve his swordsmanship. In fact, Guhan knew that the best opponent in the world to improve his swordsmanship was none other than a master swordsman among the swordbearers. The most powerful swordsman in the world today was undoubtedly the Mystic Sword Soul. However, this Mystic Sword Soul was definitely not in Shanghai Pass. It was impossible for Guhan to find the Mystic Sword Soul as his opponent. As for the swordbearers in Shanghai Pass, in Guhan's eyes, only Liuyan Ling's swordsmanship could help him hone his swordsmanship. However, Guhan did not intend to be too close to Liuyan Ling. This was because Guhan knew that with the Black Tortoise incident, Guhan would sooner or later kill his way to the Liuyan clan and have a huge battle with them. He would force the Liuyan clan to release all the sword soul marks of Kanzu that they had kept. Then, Guhan and Kanzu would have a battle that transcended time and space. Only by killing Kanzu's sword soul with his own hands could Guhan be able to erase the hatred in his heart for the Black Tortoise that had been brought to the past by Kanzu. He couldn't count on the sword bearers within Shanghai Pass, but Ji Han couldn't get out of Shanghai Pass either. Therefore, there was only one way for Ji Han to find a strong opponent, and that was Sword Maiden Online. That's right, Ji Han only had one purpose for staying in Sword Maiden Online for the past 3 months, and that was to further hone and improve his swordsmanship with the help of all kinds of opponents in Sword Maiden Online to perfect his Chaos Sword art. At the beginning, Guhan suggested to Tomono Kakaze that Tomono Kakaze create a small instance dungeon for him. Then, there would be some powerful opponents in the instance dungeon for Guhan to train himself. To this, Masato Tomono didn't say anything else and gave a clear refusal. No matter how small the instance dungeon was, as long as it exceeded the rules of Sword Maiden Online and created a separate instance dungeon, Tomono Kakaze's actions would be immediately discovered by the scientists who were monitoring her. Then, she would be punished severely. This was a risk that Tomono Kakaze was absolutely unwilling to take. After hearing Tomono Kakaze's reason, Guhan did not force the other party. It did not matter even if he did not have Tomono Kakaze's help. Guhan could find his own opponent. As a result, the games were suddenly thrown into chaos. Military Governor, who had disappeared for a month, once again appeared in front of all the players. However, this time, Military Governor did not appear in front of the players as a powerful instance dungeon finisher. Instead, he appeared as a crazy challenger. Military Governor first appeared on a sunny afternoon. The Spirit Sword level swordbearer, Ouyang-ji, had just left the instance dungeon clearance center and was about to return to his sword tomb when a player suddenly stood in front of him. "You are Ouyang-ji?" This player was wearing a tall hat that completely covered his face. Therefore, Ouyang-ji could not see the other party's appearance clearly. He just felt that the other party was a little familiar. "I am Ouyang-ji. What business do you have with me?" Ouyang-ji nodded arrogantly. As a rare spirit sword level swordbearer in the game, Ouyang-ji indeed had a reason to be arrogant. "Is Lady Phaseless Divine Sword your sword lady?" The player who deliberately covered his face asked again. "All the players on the forum know that my sword lady is the famous Lady Phaseless Divine Sword. Why do you have to ask a question you already know the answer to? What is your purpose?" Ouyang-ji was a little unhappy. "Spar with me." The player said calmly. Spar. Ouyang rolled his eyes. Sorry, I have no interest in sparring with a nobody. Wait until you become as famous as me. After saying that, Ouyang prepared to leave this inexplicable player. Wait. This person reached out to stop Ouyang and then showed his shiny golden name. F***CK. Lord Military Governor. Ouyang was so scared that he fell to the ground. How could he be so lucky to meet this god? One day, such news suddenly spread in the game. Hey. Have you heard? The military governor disappeared for a month and appeared again. He even took the initiative to challenge a spirit sword level swordbearer named Ouyang. In the tea house, a player and a few friends said excitedly. What? The military governor appeared again and challenged a spirit sword level swordbearer? And he failed. The player's friend shook his head repeatedly. Impossible. The military governor clearly defeated an immortal sword level swordbearer in the 8 cities tournament. How could he lose to a small spirit sword level swordbearer? Yes, I know this Ouyang. He also participated in the 8 cities tournament. However, this Ouyang didn't even squeeze into the top 64. How could he be a match for the military governor? Your news must be fake. Bah. I heard this from the brother-in-law of the wife of Ouyang's friend's brother. How could it be fake? The player said unconvinced. Phut, who believes you? The braggers at the table immediately boasted and expressed their disdain for this player who spread gossip. As a result, after boasting for a while, a player with a big white name above his head swaggered in. When these braggers saw this, they thought, my god, isn't the name above this player's head Ouyang? So these braggers immediately pulled Ouyang to their table, helped him order food, poured him wine, and said a lot of good things. Finally, they couldn't suppress the curiosity in their hearts and asked Ouyang, Brother Ouyang, I heard that you defeated the military governor. Is this true? You want to know? Ouyang first kept them guessing. When these braggers felt uncomfortable, he slammed his fist on the table and said in a loud voice that the entire tea house could hear, Yes, Grandpa did defeat the military governor. Ouyang's voice instantly attracted the players in the entire tea house to his side. Although 80% of the players thought that Ouyang was bragging, because they were full of interest in the military governor who had disappeared for a month, they were also very interested to hear how Ouyang was bragging. Let me tell you. In fact, the military governor took the initiative to ask me to fight. I couldn't refuse even if I wanted to. So, the two of us fought for 3 hours in the ring. In the end, I was better and broke the military governor's personal shield. After that, the military governor simply admitted defeat, Ouyang said proudly. You're bragging, you. The military governor could beat a fairy sword wielder. How could he lose to you? Why don't you show us the video and we'll believe you? A player jeered. Who said I didn't record it? I'll show you the video now. Ouyang's face turned red. He immediately took out his personal terminal. After a few clicks, a video was projected in the air. Everyone quickly turned their attention to the video. Ouyang really did not lie. The person standing opposite him was really the player who had the Golden King of Yews go stomping the Sword Instance Dungeons number 1 and surrendered, the military governor. Everyone looked at the playback time of the video. It was actually 185 minutes long. Therefore, for the next 3 hours, everyone was immersed in this video. At the end, when the military governor's personal shield was broken by the phaseless sword and he admitted defeat, everyone came to their senses. Oh my god! The military governor actually lost. A player covered his mouth in disbelief. But why do I feel that this video is so weird? The military governor fought so awkwardly. He didn't have the golden heaven and earth strength that he showed in the 8 cities conference at all. It feels like. Another player said with a weird expression. It feels like a normal person, right? A player with a face full of beard, who looked very experienced, answered the previous player's question. Didn't you guys notice? This military governor didn't use any skills from the beginning to the end. Moreover, the surface of his sword lady didn't have any flowing light covering it. This can only mean one thing. The military governor didn't use sword element during the battle. Are you kidding? Which sword wielder doesn't use sword element during a battle? A player did not believe the bearded player's words at all. That's right, that's right. A sword wielder who doesn't use sword element is only physically stronger than a normal person. Other than that, he's exactly the same as a normal person. Let's not talk about the military governor who is a famed sword level. Even an emperor sword level sword wielder would lose to a spiritual sword level sword lady if he didn't use sword element. Another player continued to say, I don't king understand this, but the truth is that this military governor really didn't use any sword element. However, did you guys pay attention to the sword skill that this military governor used? In terms of sword skill alone, the military governor's sword skill is more than a few times better than during the 8 Cities Conference. The bearded player said with a face full of admiration. Hey, brother Ouyang, is this brother right? Did the military governor really not use sword element throughout the battle? Hence, the other players looked at Ouyang Chigwa with questioning eyes. That's true. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the ability to defeat Sir Military Governor. Ouyang Chigwa smiled awkwardly, but he admitted it straightforwardly. When the onlookers were about to interrogate Ouyang Chigwa about the specific situation, Ouyang Chigwa's personal terminal suddenly notified him that a text message had been sent. Ouyang Chigwa opened the text message and immediately jumped up from his seat. He cupped his fists at the onlookers around him. I'm sorry. Sir Military Governor said that he wants to fight with me again, so I'm going now. After saying that, Ouyang Chigwa left the tea house quickly, leaving the onlookers dumbfounded. Chapter 939. After about 5 or 6 hours, Ouyang Shusheng returned to the tea house with weak footsteps and somewhat weak nerves. Most of the spectators who had been listening to Ouyang Shusheng had left, but there were still 3 or 4 spectators in the tea house. They were obviously waiting for Ouyang Shusheng here. As soon as they saw Ouyang Shusheng, they immediately stopped him and asked him about the situation of the battle. Oh my god. This time, I fought for 4.5 hours, I almost died of exhaustion. Ouyang Shusheng said very tiredly, and then once again gathered all his strength and shouted loudly in the tea house, but Grandpa, I defeated the military governor for the 2nd time. Even if I die of exhaustion, I'm willing. Just like before, this time, Ouyang Shusheng's words once again attracted the attention of a large number of players, and they once again surrounded Ouyang Shusheng. After Ouyang Shusheng showed off for a while, he very simply played the video of the 2nd battle. This time, the length of the video was 4.5 hours, and the process of the battle was almost exactly the same as the previous one. Without using the sword element, the military governor relied on his exquisite swordsmanship to launch a fierce battle with the spirit sword level Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword. In the end, the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword still broke the military governor's personal shield and won the battle. But this time, there were a few very key points that were different from the last time. The first and most important point was that the time was different. Previously, the military governor failed in 3 hours, but this time, the military governor delayed the time to 4.5 hours. The second was the personal shield of the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword. Although the personal shield of the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword also lost a certain amount of energy last time, the energy was not much, only about 20% of the total. But this time, the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword lost more than 30% of the personal shield energy. From these 2 points, it could be seen that the military governor in the 2nd battle had improved a lot compared to the military governor in the 1st battle. The news of the military governor's reappearance and the strange battle with the spirit sword level players instantly spread throughout the game. After a month, posts related to the military governor flooded the forums once again. Ouyang Shichi was also very business-minded and uploaded his video to the forum. However, because the other party involved in the video, the military governor, did not authorize Ouyang Shichi, so Ouyang Shichi could not set a fee for the video. He could only provide it as a free video for everyone. The post spread like wildfire in the forum. Many players rushed to the forum to click on the news about the military governor when they learned that the military governor had reappeared. Then, they saw the video that stunned them. In the next few days, Ouyang Geometry no longer appeared in the tea house. Instead, he constantly posted new battle videos on the forum. They were all battle videos of the military governor challenging him. The third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, the sixth time, the military governor challenged Ouyang Geometry's Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword again and again. Although the Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword won in the end, the duration of each battle was longer than the previous one. The Lady Phaseless Sacred Sword also lost more personal shield energy than the previous one. In the end, on the seventh attempt, after a full 8 hours of arduous battle, the commander finally broke through the Lady Phaseless Divine Sword's personal protective shield. He still had about 10% of his personal protective shield left, so he could be considered to have achieved a legitimate victory. Although this was the result that all the players had already guessed, when they really saw that a sword wielder was actually able to defeat a spirit sword level sword mistress without using sword essence. This kind of violent shock swept through the hearts of every player like a storm. Only then did they realize that simple sword techniques could also be terrifying to such an extent, to actually be able to directly defeat a powerful spirit sword level sword mistress who went all out. However, Ouyang Chigwa's defeat did not signify the end of the admiral's journey. In just a short span of 2 days, another player named Yimogu Cheng copied Ouyang Chigwa's actions and uploaded his own battle video onto the forum. Yimogu Cheng's opponent was none other than the admiral. Yimogu City's spirit sword level sword mistress was the famous blood transformation sword. It was said that it was a sword modified from the blood transformation sword. It was a powerful demonic sword. The Phaseless Sacred Sword was ranked 39th in the spirit sword record, while the blood transformation sword was ranked 27th in the famous swords record, which was 12 places ahead of the Phaseless Sacred Sword. The spirit sword record was not like the treasure sword record or the famous swords record. Because there were a lot of sword mistresses in the treasure sword record and the famous swords record, the gap between each rank was not big. Moreover, it did not mean that the one with a higher rank would definitely win. Many times, there was the possibility of a counterattack. However, in the spirit sword record, unless the sword wielder of both sides had a difference of more than tens of thousands of sword essence, it was difficult for the spirit swords to counterattack. This was because the difference between each name in the spirit sword record was quite huge. Therefore, when the military governor and the blood transformation sword lady fought in the first battle, the military governor, who had defeated the Phaseless Sacred Sword lady before, suffered a crushing defeat this time. In less than 2 hours, the admiral had been defeated by Lady Swords of the Bloodline Extinction Goddess. However, the plot after that was the same as what Ouyang Chosha had experienced. The military governor continuously issued challenges to the blood transformation sword lady. In 5 days, he issued a total of 8 challenge invitations. Each challenge took more time and consumed more energy than the previous one. The military governor was progressing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Therefore, Yimogu Cheng also ushered in the same ending as Ouyang Chosha. In the end, he was defeated by the military governor. It was just that Yimogu Cheng was a little luckier than Ouyang Chosha. Because Ouyang Chosha was defeated on the 7th time, but Yimogu Cheng persisted until the 9th time. There was nothing much to say about the following plot. It was nothing more than a reincarnation of the previous plot. The inspector continued to challenge the spirit sword rank sword maidens who were ranked higher than him, and he continued to grow in defeat after defeat, and finally defeated his opponent. This kind of challenge lasted for a whole month, and the entire forum also discussed for a whole month. This discussion even gradually spread to the world outside the game. Many sword bearers who never played games in real life also discovered that such a madman had appeared in the game. He was actually able to defeat so many sword ladies of the spirit sword realm without using sword element. Although these sword ladies were sword ladies in the game, in theory, their strength was slightly weaker than the real sword ladies. However, these sword ladies were actually the consciousness fragments of natural sword ladies. Their own swordsmanship was almost at the same level as the real sword ladies. If the sword ladies in the game were defeated, the real sword ladies might not be much stronger. Gradually, these few questions formed in the hearts of the people in the military governor's challenge. First, was the sword essence really as important as people thought? Would humans be able to kill the powerful Yuenko even without the sword element? Second, what was the limit of the military governor without using the sword essence? Then, without using the sword essence, could he defeat an immortal sword wielder or even an emperor sword wielder? Third, could ordinary humans achieve the same swordsmanship as the military governor? If they could, didn't this mean that even if ordinary humans could not synchronize with the sword ladies, as long as they had a weapon that could hurt Yuan Ku, could they also become an existence equivalent to a spirit sword wielder? This kind of question constantly lingered in the minds of humans, and it even gradually formed a logic called useless sword essence theory. Many humans who aspired to become sword wielders but were forever blocked at the door because they could not synchronize with the sword ladies seemed to have seen the dawn of their lives. They learned from this military governor and practiced a good swordsmanship. They could also fight for humanity. Probably aware of the impact of this trend, on the 25th day of the military governor's challenge, the official media of the 8 major base cities published such an editorial almost at the same time. First of all, the author of this editorial was very shocking. This was because the author was none other than the emperor of sword wielders, the great Hao Tianzhendi. In this editorial, Hao Tianzhendi first explained why the military governor wanted to challenge like this. Hao Tianzhendi said that this was because the military governor was training his swordsmanship. He wanted to reach a higher level of swordsmanship. That was all. There was no other purpose. Following that, the Clear Sky Sword Emperor very clearly answered a few questions from above. First, the sword essence was indeed very important. The sword essence was the foundation of every sword wielder. A sword wielder could not go astray on this path. Working hard to improve one's sword essence was the best way to become stronger. However, Hao Tianzhendi also admitted that humans could indeed kill the powerful Yuan Ku without the sword essence. Secondly, without using sword essence, the limit of a human being's ability to defeat a universe-grade Yuanko, which was the human's immortal-grade sword wielder. Hao Tianzhendi could make such a judgment because Hao Tianzhendi had discovered this after looking up the information of the Liuonian family. After Kunzu became an emperor sword wielder, he had given up on using the sword essence for a period of time. Instead, he had relied on his swordsmanship like the military governor. His Majesty Kunzu's strongest achievement was using swordsmanship to defeat universe-level Yuan Ku. As for flood-level and desolation-level Yuan Ku, Kunzu had used the sword essence every time he encountered them. He had never thought of using swordsmanship to defeat his opponent. His Majesty Kunzu was unparalleled. The limit that he could reach was naturally the limit that other sword wielders could reach. Therefore, universe-level Yuan Ku was the limit that could be reached. This player called the military governor could only reach this limit in his lifetime. Third, Hao Tianzhendi also told everyone clearly that normal people could not reach the same level of swordsmanship as the military governor. Hao Tianzhendi even revealed that he had met the military governor in real life. The military governor was also a very powerful sword wielder in real life. More importantly, the military governor was extremely talented. He was not inferior to Zhe Tianzhendi back then. That was why he had achieved so much and trained himself by fighting with the sword lady. More importantly, although the military governor did not use the sword essence, he was a true famed sword wielder. The sword lady in his hand was a real famed sword lady. When he was one with his mind, he could unleash the sword lady's true power. This power was something that normal people could not unleash even if they held a famed sword lady. At the same time, the military governor's physique was dozens of times better than normal people. For example, the footwork that the military governor used in the recording was so fast that it was impossible for a normal person to reach such a high speed. Therefore, if a normal person wanted to imitate the military governor, it would undoubtedly be like a child learning to walk. It would only be a joke. However, it was not impossible to imitate the military governor's path. Most people only needed to practice hard and reach a certain level of swordsmanship. In that case, as long as one had an artificial sword maiden that could not be synchronized, they would be able to fight against mouse and tiger Yuenko. In other words, they would be equivalent to an ancient sword-tier swordsman. Some sword-bearers with outstanding swordsmanship could fight ghost-level and soul-level Yuan Ku. They were equivalent to treasured sword-bearers. However, this was the limit of a normal person. In the end, Hao Tianzhendi made a concluding statement. Sword-bearers were not allowed to learn the military governor's fighting style. They were also not allowed to practice their own swordsmanship. This was because before they could master their swordsmanship, they would die under Yuan Ku's attacks because they did not have the protection of the sword lady. As for normal people, they could try to practice swordsmanship. If they found that they had good swordsmanship talent, they could try to practice swordsmanship. At the same time, the Sword Committee also wanted to set up experimental classes for sword masters in the 8 base cities' academies. Ordinary people with decent talent in swordsmanship could sign up for these experimental classes. The Sword Committee would conduct a comprehensive study on the possibility of letting ordinary sword masters join the battle. After Hao Tianjiandi's editorial was published, the entire human society was instantly in an uproar. A large number of media outlets analyzed Hao Tianjiandi's speech and found that if the sword master teaching classes were successful, normal people would also have the strength to fight Yuan Ku. Then, the power of human beings would undoubtedly enter a new era. One could imagine the scene of an army made up of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of normal people fighting against Yuan Ku. All in all, the whole world became different after Guhan's challenge. As the core person who caused all this, Guhan knew nothing about the outside world. He was completely immersed in improving his swordsmanship. Chapter 940. In reality, all ordinary people felt their blood boiling because of Hao Tianjiandi's editorial and felt that a new era of mankind was coming. On the other hand, the players' expectations for the military governor had also risen to the peak because the military governor had previously defeated the 8th-ranked spiritual sword-level swordmistress. According to the order, the military governor should challenge the 7th-ranked spiritual sword-level swordmistress. However, not all spiritual sword-level swordmistresses in the game had their own sword-bearers. In fact, in the entire game, there were only 2 sword-bearers who had spiritual sword-level swordmistresses ranked in the top 7. One of the spiritual sword-level swordmistresses was an old acquaintance of Guhan. It was Lecourgard, the spiritual sword-level swordmistress who had fought against Guhan in the 8-city tournament. Her spiritual sword-level swordmistress was the 5th-ranked spiritual sword-level swordmistress, Jean. In a room full of medieval style, Lecourgard sat silently on her bed, looking at her personal terminal from time to time as if waiting for some important communication. Behind Lecourgard, a girl in silver-white steel armor and her swordmistress maintained the same posture, sitting upright on the bed. The two of them were like 2 statues. "It's here." Lecourgard felt her personal terminal vibrate, and then a message was directly sent to her mind. After reading the message, Lecourgard immediately stood up from the bed like a spring, clenched her hands tightly into fists, and turned to look at swordmistress Jean behind her. "Jean, our chance to avenge our humiliation has finally come." When Lecourgard said this, her mood became obviously agitated. The pair of huge breasts on her chest wantonly swayed, rolled, and pushed each other. Since being defeated by the military governor in the 8-city tournament in a humiliating way, Lecourgard had been thinking about how to take revenge all the time. At the same time, she trained herself in a way that could be called abusive. In terms of self-esteem, Lecourgard felt that her body had more than doubled. Now it was finally time for her revenge. All the players in the game were looking forward to the battle between Jean d'Arc and the military governor, but unlike before, there was no news about this battle released in the forum. It was as if the military governor had stopped his challenge. For 5 consecutive days, the entire forum was quiet. Just when everyone thought that the military governor had given up, a new message exploded on the forum. A player with the verified game ID Lecourgard suddenly posted on the forum. "From today onwards, my game ID Lecourgard, my real name is Lecourgard Dracula. I voluntarily recognize the military governor as my godfather, and I voluntarily become the goddaughter of the military governor. Be it my loyal followers and subordinates in the game or in reality, all my honor, wealth, and everything belong to military governor Daddy." Such a simple post instantly blew up the entire forum like an atomic bomb. No one understood what was going on. Why did Lecourgard post such a seemingly inexplicable post? Why did she suddenly recognize the military governor as her father? Just when everyone was discussing this matter, A player with the ID Leslie on the forum gave all the curious players an explanation. She even posted the long-awaited battle video of Jean d'Arc and the military governor on the forum. After watching the battle video, the players finally realized what had happened. The video started in a ring. On both sides of the ring were Le Courgard and the military governor. First, the military governor thanked Le Courgard in a very tired voice for accepting his challenge. Then, he explained that he would only fight against Jean d'Arc and that he would not use his sword element in the battle. At this point, according to the usual script, Le Courgard should have nodded in agreement with the military governor's battle method. Then, after the usual battle etiquette, the duel would officially begin. However, Le Courgard became the first sword wielder to object to the duel. She said that she was also a sword master and that she wanted to defeat the military governor in a duel between sword masters. In other words, Le Courgard wanted to defeat her opponent with her own swordsmanship, just like the military governor did. It was obvious that the military governor was a little surprised by this request. But after a short moment of consideration, he said that he could accept Le Courgard's suggestion. Just when the military governor thought that he could start the duel, Le Courgard made a new request. This Le Courgard actually said that she wanted to fight fair and square and obtain a fair and square victory. That was why she didn't use her sword element in the duel. She wanted to compete with the military governor in pure swordsmanship. The military governor decisively refused. The military governor said that he chose this duel to hone his swordsmanship. If Le Courgard didn't use her sword element, the military governor wouldn't be able to hone his swordsmanship. This duel would be a waste of time. The military governor's words made Le Courgard go berserk. This was because there was a hidden meaning in his words. The military governor said that a simple duel with Le Courgard wouldn't be able to hone his swordsmanship. It was obvious that Le Courgard's swordsmanship was too different from his level. She wasn't even qualified to be his opponent. This made Le Courgard go berserk. Le Courgard repeatedly asked the military governor to have a fair duel with her. However, the military governor refused without hesitation. When he was about to leave the arena, Le Courgard suddenly said, "You coward. You must be afraid of losing to me. I, Le Courgard Dracula, swear in the name of my ancestors that if you can defeat me, I will become your subordinate in the game and listen to all your orders. I will never go back on my word." Le Courgard's words made the military governor stop in his tracks. Instead, he turned around to confirm with her, "Is what you said true? Words are spoken, neither old nor young," Le Courgard said proudly. "All right, let's fight." The military governor nodded, agreeing to this fair duel. In just 3 minutes, Le Courgard realized how ridiculous and ignorant her promise was. She was as fragile as a quail in front of the military governor's starry sky of swordsmanship. Not to mention resisting, Le Courgard couldn't even see where the military governor's sword was. In just a short minute, she had to endure more than 200 attacks from the military governor without being able to retaliate even once. Fortunately, the energy of Le Courgard's personal shield was strong enough. Otherwise, it would not have lasted more than 3 minutes. At most, it would only take 1 minute for the military governor to break through Le Courgard's personal shield. However, there was not much difference between 3 minutes and 1 minute. It was a complete and utter defeat. Forget it. As long as you free Dame Jean and let me have a good fight with her, then we can forget about this matter. I'll pretend I didn't hear your promise. I won't post the recording on the forum anyway. The military governor saw Le Courgard's gloomy expression and took the initiative to tell Le Courgard that he was willing to give up on the promise she made. "Don't look down on me too much, military governor. I, Le Courgard, am a man of my word. I will never go back on my word. From now on, I am your subordinate in the game." Although Le Courgard was defeated, she still maintained her arrogance. The military governor could not help but nod in approval. He felt that Le Courgard was a promising talent. "All right, since you have broken out of prison and fulfilled your promise to be my subordinate, I order you to release Lady Jean," the military governor said to Le Courgard. "Wait." Le Courgard seemed unwilling to accept her defeat. Her eyes were still burning with the flames of battle. "I have overestimated myself. I rarely fight without using sword essence. That's why I lost to you. However, I have yet to use my true strength. I believe that as long as I use Jean's skills in battle, I will definitely be able to defeat you. Lycorgard said. Yes, I have already said that you can use sword essence in battle. The military governor could not help but frown. Did Lycorgard not understand human language? I have also said that I want to defeat you fair and square. So, I hope that you can also use sword essence and have a fair battle. It turned out that Lycorgard had such an idea. There is no need for that. Have you forgotten that during the 8 Cities Conference, you were already defeated by my sword when you used sword essence? There is no need for such a battle. The military governor refused again. He then directly blocked Lycorgard's path of retreat. Don't forget, you are already my subordinate in the game. You have to listen to my orders. Don't make such a meaningless request. This is not a meaningless request. Back then, it was you who. Lycorgard touched her pair of huge oppies. Her eyes were so anxious that tears almost flowed out. It was obvious that she blamed the military governor for attacking her oppies crazily during the battle, which led to her defeat. Hearing Lycorgard's words, the military governor could not help but blush. At that time, the difference between his sword essence and Lycorgard's was too huge. Therefore, he had no choice but to use such an unpresentable method. It was only natural that Lycorgard would not accept her defeat because she was resentful. Seeing that the military governor did not speak, Lycorgard seemed to want to reject her like before. Therefore, Lycorgard decided to go all out and once again put her life at stake. If you can defeat me, not only will I be your subordinate in the game, but I will also be your subordinate in real life and listen to your orders. The military governor's eyes lit up when he heard this. According to Guhan's plan for his life, it was indeed time for him to consider recruiting his own swordbearers in real life and build his own army. After all, apart from the few Gendi during the Great Destruction, every Emperor sword-level swordbearers had their own powerful army. All right, Lycorgard, this silly girl, was betting her entire life. Chapter 941. After fighting with Lycorgard again, Guhan had to admit that she had improved a lot in the past 3 months. Her strength was no longer the same as when she was at the 8 Cities tournament. Unfortunately, it was useless because Guhan had also improved a lot in the past 3 months. Not only had his sword essence in the game increased by 4 times, reaching 80,000 quarks of sword essence, but Guhan's own swordsmanship had also improved greatly. So compared to the 8 Cities tournament, Lycorgard was defeated even faster. Moreover, Guhan did not use any opportunistic moves like attacking his opponent's OP. He used one terrifying sword move after another to completely disintegrate Lycorgard. Moreover, after Guhan used sword essence, his attack power increased by many times. It didn't even take Guhan 3 minutes to defeat Lycorgard with his sword in just 1 minute. He left Lycorgard to fall to the ground alone, feeling lost. Are you satisfied now? You can spar with me according to my request. Guhan walked in front of Lycorgard and said to her. Lycorgard did not say anything. She felt as if she had been completely broken by Guhan. Forget it. Why don't you take a good rest today? I'll come back to you tomorrow. Seeing Lycorgard's state, Guhan knew that she could no longer fight with him. Just as Guhan was about to leave, the holy sword of Jean in Lycorgard's hand suddenly turned into a bright light and appeared in front of Guhan in the form of a girl in armor. Greetings, Dame Jean d'Arc. Guhan saluted the young lady. Didn't you want to fight me? Lady Jean stared at Guhan with bright eyes. Come on. I'll satisfy you now. Let's fight. I'll use my full strength, and you won't use sword essence. That's exactly what I wanted. Guhan nodded. Since Lady Jean took the initiative to spar with him, Guhan naturally had no reason to refuse. But you have to promise me a bet. Jean d'Arc was indeed worthy of being the sword mistress of Lycorgard. This was the 3rd wager of the competition. What bet? Guhan asked curiously. From Guhan's point of view, Lycorgard had already lost both in the game and in real life. What else could she possibly have? If I win this battle, then everything Lycorgard has promised you will be nullified. Lecourgard will regain her freedom and you will no longer have any relationship with her. If I lose, then Lecourgard will recognize you as her father. All of her, including her flesh, will be yours. I can even tell you this news. Lecourgard only needs 20,000 quarks of sword essence in reality to become a spirit sword level swordbearer. And once she meets the sword essence requirement of a spirit sword level swordbearer, she will definitely be able to synchronize with my real body in reality. Are you satisfied with these conditions? Hearing Jean d'Arc's words, the military governor was indeed very satisfied. This was simply an irresistible condition. Not to mention anything else, just Lecourgard's surging body alone was enough for the military governor to recoup his losses. What's more, Lecourgard was about to become a spirit sword level swordbearer in reality, and with the guarantee of Jean d'Arc's consciousness fragment, this almost meant that Lecourgard could 100% successfully synchronize with Jean d'Arc in reality and become a spirit sword level swordbearer. In 5 days, no matter how many times I challenge you, as long as I can defeat you within 5 days, I win this bet. What do you think? The military governor asked Jean d'Arc, but Jean d'Arc was about to admit it, but she was interrupted by the military governor. You are just Lecourgard's sword mistress. You are not qualified to make decisions for Lecourgard. That's why I hope it's Lecourgard herself who promises me this, and not you, Dame Jean. Jean d'Arc's decision is my Arc's decision. We are one. At the same time, Lecourgard, who had suffered a blow, seemed to have recovered her willpower. She stood up firmly and said to Guhan, "Okay." Guhan nodded. This new bet was officially established. Then, just like the previous challenge launched by the military governor, after a few hours of hard fighting, the military governor, who did not use his sword element, was defeated by Jean d'Arc. Lecourgard thought that the other party would be eager to challenge her again the next day for the sake of the bet. But to Lecourgard's surprise, not only did he not appear on the second day, but the military governor also did not appear on the third and fourth day. It was not until the 5th day that the military governor contacted Lecourgard in the last few hours and said that the battle could start again. "Why didn't you come to me a few days ago?" Lecourgard asked the military governor curiously before the battle began. "There's a problem in reality. Some ignorant Yuenko came to die, and I've already killed them." The military governor shrugged and said, "In fact, in the past 3 days, the Wu people suddenly launched a strange attack on the Ju-Tien Star battle formation. The reason why this attack was a little strange was because the Wu people's battle at the beginning was very loud. The entire Wu people's army of tens of thousands of troops pressed forward, as if they were going to fight to the death with the humans. But the problem was that these Wu people's attacking troops did not have a Grand Magus to hold the line. All the Grand Magi were still in a state of disappearance. Moreover, this time, the Wu people's attack was very sudden, and they also retreated very suddenly. When the front line at Shanghai Pass was in a precarious situation and the Guardian's mansion was about to give the order to give up the few areas guarding the outermost area, the shamans who still had the upper hand retreated without any hesitation. They even gave up on the areas that they thought they could take down with just a little more effort. Because his Shixing garrison was the front line of the battlefield, the sudden attack forced the military governor to temporarily leave the game world and lead his ancient sword wielders to defend the city. After the Wu people retreated, he guarded the city for a few days, and when he was sure that the Wu people would not launch another surprise attack, he re-entered the game. Although this was undoubtedly a great victory, it seriously raised the suspicions of the Shanghai Pass and the Sword Committee headquarters. The Wu people's abnormal behavior made people suspect that the Wu people were brewing a new conspiracy. Therefore, under the deployment of the Sunstar garrison and the Taiyin Star garrison, all kinds of sword wielders accepted reconnaissance missions, trying to figure out what kind of conspiracy the Wu people were brewing. Of course, this had nothing to do with Guhan for the time being. Guhan's full attention was still on how to perfect his chaos sword art. He rushed to go online during the last period of the 5th day and launched a battle with Lecourgard that would determine her freedom and fate. It was an extremely fierce battle. In order to prevent her sword wielder from becoming someone else's slave, or rather, her daughter, Jean could be said to have used the most powerful swordsmanship in her several reincarnations. After that, When Jean's true self retrieved this fragment of consciousness and completely read the entire battle memory, she had to admit that even Jean's true self couldn't do this in reality. The energy of Guhan and Jean's personal shield decreased like two spirals as the battle continued. The gap between the two of them was no more than 3% of the personal shield's energy. When there was only 5% of the personal shield's energy left, Jean finally used her almost self-destructive ultimate skill, My Lord's Descent. At the cost of reducing the sword element limit of the sword wielder by 10,000 points and not being able to transform into a sword maiden for a month, she obtained the powerful effect of Angel's Descent, which increased all attributes by 10 times. Both Jean and Le Courgard felt that after using this skill, they would definitely win and defeat this unbelievably powerful human. However, in the next few minutes, Le Courgard and Jean saw the most dazzling sword in their lives. It was a sword art that was like a flying fairy. It came inexplicably and disappeared inexplicably. Le Courgard and Jean did not even know what happened. The remaining 5% of the personal shield on Jean's body collapsed in an instant. At this time, the military governor's personal shield only had 2% left. Let's call this skill Chaos Flying Fairy. After muttering this sentence, the military governor fell to the ground like a corpse and fell into a deep coma. He was then forced to go offline by the game. Le Courgard and Jean were left dumbfounded. What a pity. Just one more step. But that Chaos Flying Fairy was so beautiful. Le Courgard clasped her hands in front of her chest and said as if she was praying, "Damn it. I've let you down. I shouldn't have continued this bet with that damned human. I've caused you to completely fall into it." Jean's face was full of regret. There were even a few drops of tears in her eyes. "It's okay. This is a decision made by both of us. We need to bear it together." Le Courgard pulled Jean into her arms and gently kissed Jean's eyes, kissing Jean's tears into her mouth. This was truly a scene as beautiful as a lily in full bloom. "Wait. Le Courgard. We might not have lost yet." Jean was excited. She pointed at the clock on the arena. It was now 12:10. Jean remembered that her battle with Guhan had ended less than 10 minutes ago. In other words, this victory was actually achieved on the 6th day. If one were to strictly look at the words, then it could be said that Le Courgard had obtained the final victory. That was why she was so excited. No. A loss is a loss. I'm not someone who can't afford to lose. Surprisingly, even though there was such a legitimate and perfect excuse for her to get rid of her terrible fate and become a father to a strange man, Le Courgard simply rejected this excuse. "That's really your style." Jean looked at Le Courgard with an expression that was unknown whether it was hatred or admiration. Then, the recording ended. The audience on the forum were silent. Chapter 942. There were two reasons for the silence of the spectators. The first was naturally because of Le Courgard's promise. Even when she could have taken back her freedom in the end, she gave up because of the promise in her heart. The spectators in these forums asked themselves if they were in that environment, they would not have been able to do this no matter what. The second reason was that they were silent because of the military governor's chaos flying immortal at the end. In the absence of the sword element, this sword had become so terrifying. If the military governor used the sword element, wouldn't it be possible for even an immortal sword wielder to be defeated by the sword of the military governor? It was said that a few days later, the sword spirit, known as the number 1 sword master, saw this video. After a few hours of silence in the room, he said to his friend, "From today onwards, the number 1 sword master is not him, the sword spirit, but the military governor in the game." With the words of the perplexed sword spirit, the video of the last battle with Jean quickly spread among all humans. It was said that almost all the sword bearers had seen this video, even those sword bearers at the immortal sword tier were no exception. In the end, more than 90% of humans in the 8 base cities had seen this video, except for Jerusalem, which was difficult to calculate. Unexpectedly, the biggest beneficiary of this video was not the military governor, but Le Courgard. Because of Le Courgard's perfect performance of keeping her promise, coupled with her pair of huge oppies that could suffocate a person to death, she instantly became a goddess in the eyes of all men and the representative of social sincerity. Almost overnight, she gained millions of fans, and the number of fans was still increasing. It could be said that she had replicated the legend of the rise of the military governor. At this time, more players were paying attention to the next battle of the military governor. Because there was only one spiritual sword wielder left who was ranked above Jean, everyone was almost certain that the military governor would definitely challenge that sword wielder. Even the sword wielder himself was secretly looking forward to the challenge of the military governor. He even told his friend that when the time came to challenge him, he would definitely beat the military governor so that even his mother wouldn't recognize him, so that everyone would know that not using the sword element was a crooked way. It was a pity that this sword wielder never received a challenge message from the military governor. At first, the audience thought that this was just a replay of the previous battle with Le Courgard, and that the video would automatically appear after a few days. However, after waiting for a month, there were no new recordings. Only then did the spectators vaguely feel that the Admiral's journey of challenge had come to an end. The lively forum gradually returned to its peaceful state. However, the entire human world had changed because of the challenge of the military governor. The 8 base cities opened 8 swordmaster teaching classes at the same time, and the first generation of ordinary people who could fight with Yuan Ku were being trained. Of course, these had nothing to do with Guhan. At this time, Guhan was fighting in a dungeon. This was a dungeon that had never appeared in the history of the game, and it was also the second dungeon that Guhan conquered in a completely unfamiliar situation. After defeating Jean d'Arc that day, the unconscious Guhan was forced out of the game. He only fully recovered after resting for 3 days in the real world. But this was valuable, because Ji Yuhan continued with the first move, Primal Chaos split the heavens, the second move, Primal Chaos stars, and finally created his third move, Primal Chaos flying immortal. The creation of Chaos Sky Splitter greatly improved Guhan's swordsmanship once again. Guhan even felt that if he met Gilgamesh again, he would not be as helpless as before. Guhan could at least fight with Gilgamesh for a few hundred rounds. However, the appearance of Chaos Sky Splitter also made Guhan understand that the way he fought with the Lady Swordmaster without using the sword element was like the way he fought with the Wu people. It had lost its purpose, and it could no longer help Guhan further improve his swordsmanship. Ji Yuhan had to find a stronger opponent to fight against. Logically speaking, this was not a difficult task. Next, Guhan could use the identity of military governor to challenge those fairy sword wielders. However, he never expected that the Sword Committee would send an email directly to Guhan's personal terminal through Tomono Kakaze. The email clearly stated that Ji Yuhan was not allowed to challenge any Legend of the Sword and Fairy level swordsman in the game. If Ji Yuhan dared to challenge any Legend of the Sword and Fairy level swordsman in the game, the Sword Committee would use its authority to ban the commander's account for 3 years. As for why Guhan was banned, the email did not explain clearly. However, when Guhan browsed through the various messages on the forum, he could roughly guess the reason why the Sword Committee did this. The reason was very simple. The Sword Committee was afraid that there would really be fairy sword wielders who would be defeated by military governor without using the sword element. This would undoubtedly cause a huge impact on the entire system of sword wielders. Military governor had defeated countless spirit sword wielders without using the sword element. This had broken the common sense that the Sword Committee had spent hundreds of years to shape. That was, the sword element is king, and the swordsmanship is only auxiliary. Once this common sense was broken, there would inevitably be some sword-bearers who had no talent but were ambitious enough to think that they had someone like the commander. Even though he was only a famed sword-level sword-bearer, he was able to defeat a spirit sword-level sword-bearer. Practicing swordsmanship itself was not a bad thing. The bad thing was that these sword-bearers were blindly arrogant and wanted to fight Yuenko hand-to-hand just like the sword master after mastering a lousy swordsmanship. In the end, they would die in vain in Yuenko's hands. This was not an alarmist matter. The Sword Committee had publicly announced 3 such incidents. The 3 idiots practiced according to the video of the military governor for a few days before going out of the city to practice swordsmanship with Yuan Ku. Then, 2 of them died tragically on the spot. The last one was returned by a passing patrol team and was so frightened that he became mentally weak and was receiving long-term psychological treatment. This was only one of the reasons. The more important reason was that the emotions of the ordinary people in the 8 base cities would be stirred up by the behavior of the military governor. Originally, after these ordinary people found that they could not synchronize with the Sword Lady, they could only accept the unequal treatment in the city and could only secretly envy the privileges that those sword wielders had. However, once they found out that they could obtain the same combat power as the sword wielders through another method, the whole society would definitely be in chaos. However, the Sword Committee reacted quickly. After discovering this sign, they immediately established the Sword Master teaching class. They used the method of blocking the ordinary people's outburst of passion and made most of them realize that they were still ordinary people after all and did not have the talent to practice swordsmanship. At the same time, they could also discover those ordinary people who truly had the talent to practice swordsmanship and become the new generation of combat power. Although this matter had become a good thing, it could not be done too hastily. It had to be guided slowly and patiently. Once they all defeated the sword wielders of the immortal sword realm, the ordinary people's passion would definitely rise again, and the whole situation would really be difficult to control. In summary, this was the reason why Guhan believed that the Sword Committee would prohibit him from challenging the sword wielders of the immortal sword realm. After understanding this, Guhan no longer had any resentment towards the Sword Committee. After all, the Sword Committee was also considering the overall situation of mankind. At the same time, he was probably the first person in human history to be prohibited by the Sword Committee from challenging the sword wielders of the immortal sword realm. This was an unprecedented honor. Although Guhan understood the Sword Committee in the end, Guhan could not give up on training his swordsmanship. Since the way to challenge the sword wielders of the immortal sword realm was blocked, Guhan had to find a new way. After thinking about it, Guhan realized that this opponent was still in the Sword Lady Online, in the famed Sword Level Swordsman Instance Dungeon. Although all the main bosses in the famed Sword Level Swordsman Instance Dungeon could be defeated by famed Sword Level Swordsman Instance Dungeon, there were actually some story bosses and hidden bosses that swordsmen could not defeat. The simplest example was the King Arthur's Betrayal Instance Dungeon. In it, 3 of the 10 kings of the Martyr's Palace appeared. These 3 bosses were all universe-level Yuan Ku. At that time, the weak Guhan could only rely on all kinds of tricks and tricks. In the end, he was even forced to escape with a nuclear bomb. However, now that he was also a famed sword-level swordsman, Guhan could challenge this instance dungeon in a different way. System notification: Player Military Governor, welcome to the King Arthur's Betrayal Instance Dungeon. Quest objective: find the imprisoned King Arthur and bring him back to Yangjing Base City. System notification: main quest has been updated. Quest 1, search the battlefield. Your team has discovered a high-energy reaction nearby. It is suspected that there is a battle between Yuan Ku and the swordsman. Please find and arrive at the quest location within 10 minutes. If the quest is not completed within 10 minutes, the instance dungeon will fail. System notification: special notice: if you encounter a wandering Yuan Ku, please kill them immediately. Otherwise, they will issue a warning and attract all the Yuan Ku in the stronghold to attack you. Hearing these familiar system notifications, Guhan couldn't help but feel the urge to cry. He didn't think that he would be able to return to this instance dungeon after a few months. However, he was no longer the same person he was a few months ago. When he first entered this instance dungeon, he was only an ancient sword-level swordsman. Now, however, he had entered this instance dungeon as a famed sword-level swordsman. More importantly, his true strength had increased by more than 100 or even 1,000 times compared to before. Although Guhan had written an extremely detailed strategy on the forum to teach other players how to clear this instance dungeon, this strategy had also earned Guhan tens of millions of yuan. However, this time, Guhan didn't plan to clear this instance dungeon according to his strategy. He wanted to go crazy and use a method similar to a nuclear explosion to detonate the entire instance dungeon. Chapter 943. According to the strategy that Guhan provided to the players, they had to pass through T3 in order to reach parking lot P2 as quickly as possible. This was because Terminal T3 was filled with Flood Dragon level Yuan bandits. If they relied on killing their way through Terminal T3, it would inevitably take a lot of time. Therefore, in the strategy, Guhan suggested that the players endure the damage from these Yuan Ku. As long as they rushed out of the range of T3, these Yuan Ku would not chase after them. This was indeed a very effective method. They all used this suggestion from the military governor to quickly pass through T3. However, this time, Guhan did not intend to pass through T3 according to the method described in the game strategy. He intended to use a more effective method. Guhan held the Juzi sword in his hand and injected 5,000 quarks of sword essence into it. An explosive aura surged out of Guhan's body and instantly filled the entire world. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, waterfall golden chrysanthemum. With a single thought from Guhan's lips, the dazzling golden chrysanthemum formed by more than 50 sword energies instantly struck the entire T3 terminal. This T3 terminal, which had stood for 1,000 years, was cut into pieces by the sword energies like tofu. At the same time, the dozens of Yuan bandits in the T3 terminal were also directly cut into 2 pieces by the sword energies. Done. After releasing the waterfall golden chrysanthemum, the military governor walked into T3 with great ease. Along the way, he saw the dismembered corpses of Yuan Ku. These were all Yuan Ku who were equivalent to famed swordsmen. They were the opponents that Guhan could not fight back at all and could only face head-on. Now, with a single ultimate skill, all of these Yuan Ku were dead and could no longer stop Guhan's advance. The moment Guhan passed through T3, the T3 terminal, which had become dilapidated after 1,000 years, could no longer support its old body under the destructive attack of the waterfall golden chrysanthemum. The entire building collapsed as if it was facing a magnitude 12 earthquake, and finally turned into a pile of dust. Guhan did not care about the fate of T3 terminal. He leisurely entered the parking lot of P2 and successfully found Shudar and Ardwolf who were preparing to kill their opponents. "Who are you?" Guhan could ignore the collapse of T3 terminal, but Shudar could not pretend that he did not see it. He stared at Guhan who was walking towards him with extreme vigilance. His hands tightly gripped the golden chisel spear in his hand, and the spearhead gave up on Ardwolf and pointed directly at Guhan's body. "Is it necessary? I just want this process to end as soon as possible." The Juzi sword in Guhan's hand trembled and a beam of sword energy struck Shudar's body with lightning-like speed. "You!" Shudar did not even have the time to utter out the second word before his body broke apart like a broken vase. In the end, it became a pile of minced meat. The dragon-class Yuan Ku, whom Hongyu and Heavenly Reliance had once needed to work together to quickly kill, was killed by one beam of sword energy. "Hello. I am Ardwolf. You must have found this place through the message I left behind with the sword in the stone, right? I am very grateful to all of you for your assistance. Please accept my gratitude." Ardwolf stood up and thanked Guhan according to his script. Guhan had heard those words countless times since a few months ago. Goodbye. Ardwolf had yet to figure out why the person who came to save him would say goodbye to him. Did he not want to find out the next part of the quest from him? Next, Ardwolf's head was separated from his neck and he became a corpse like Shudar. "I am sorry. I do not want to waste time." Guhan looked at Ardwolf's corpse and said quietly. Guhan did not come to this instant's dungeon to reminisce with Ardwolf. He did not even want to see Artoria again. He had his own reasons for coming here. He did not want to waste time on the details of the instant's dungeon. At that moment, those details were meaningless to the current Guhan. Guhan only needed to be like a bulldozer as he bulldozed through this instant's dungeon. "Ah! Ah!" Countless screams rang out beside Guhan. The dragon-class Yuan Ku attacking Guhan were easily cut in half by Guhan's sword. He did not waste a second slash. The dragon-class Yuan Ku that once required the cooperation of 6 experts to kill were now as insignificant as ants on the ground. Other than being used to show off Guhan's strength, they had no other value. System notice: Quest 4, clear the surface of Terminal T1 has been completed. Your party has successfully killed all the Yuan Ku and ensured that no messages were transmitted to the underground parking lot. Quest progress 20%. Main quest updated. System notice: Quest 5, Underground Labyrinth. The underground parking lot of Terminal T1 has been turned into a labyrinth. Please pass through the labyrinth and arrive at the dimensional altar. Please pay attention to the time. Wasting too much time in the underground labyrinth may cause negative changes. System notice, special notice. Please strictly abide by the rules of the underground labyrinth. Those who violate the rules will be severely punished. There were a total of 4 passageways that led to the dimensional altar in Terminal T1. The one that Guhan and his party had entered was the one where they had to take part in the college entrance exam like the students before the apocalypse. Guhan had advised normal players to enter this passageway because the other passageways were blocked by the powerful Yuan Ku. It was not a passageway that ordinary famed swordsmen could clear. However, that was meaningless to Guhan. Guhan chose the passageway that was closest to him and entered the underground passageway. Human. How dare you disturb the slumber of the great Arthas? A knight riding on a tall horse appeared before Guhan. However, this horse wasn't an ordinary horse. Instead, it was a skeletal horse covered in steel armor forged from cold iron. The rider on this horse wasn't an ordinary human either. Instead, it was an undead whose skin was so pale that one could see the bones underneath. This was a Death Knight, an undead creature created by the powerful Lich King Yuan Ku. It had the freezing ability of Absolute Zero, the blood-sucking ability that surpassed vampires, and the undead summoning ability that was as terrifying as the Death Mage's. In short, this was an extremely powerful Yuan Ku. The information on his personal terminal clearly showed that this Yuan Ku was at the meteor level. Killing such an opponent was undoubtedly an impossible task for a famed sword-level swordsman. This was the path closest to the dimensional altar. As long as he defeated the Death Knight and passed through the room where the Death Knight was, Guhan would be able to reach the dimensional altar directly. It was undoubtedly much simpler than the other 3 paths. However, this was also the most difficult path. In the eyes of 99% of the famed swordsmen, the meteor-level Yuan Ku was an existence that could not be defeated. Even if 6 famed swordsmen joined forces, it would still be impossible to defeat this meteor-level Yuan Ku. Guhan still vaguely remembered that there was such a passage in the dungeon information given to him by Yao Guang. The team led by Wondrous Pen had initially chosen this path to advance to the dimensional altar. Unfortunately, when the 6 top-notch famed swordsmen saw that their opponent was a Death Knight at the Meteor Realm, they could only smile wryly. After a difficult battle with the Death Knight, Arthas, for 30 minutes, the 6 famed swordsmen were directly sent out of the dungeon. Arthas still had 60% of his HP left. This completely put an end to the idea of Wondrous Pen and the others trying to pass through Arthas. In fact, in the following months, some famed swordbearers who pursued unconventional achievements formed a team to attack Arthas. They constantly researched ways to defeat Arthas, and in the end, they succeeded in defeating Arthas. However, this team of famed swordsmen who defeated Arthas were the best among the famed swordsmen. At the same time, their composition was very unique. There were even some very unorthodox sword maidens who appeared specifically to deal with Arthas. These sword maidens were very weak when completing the other quests in the King Arthur's Betrayal Instance dungeon. Therefore, after defeating Arthas, this team of famed sword maidens were unable to clear the instance dungeon. However, this was not a problem for this team. Their original goal was to defeat Arthas. Whether or not they could clear the instance dungeon was not within their consideration. At this time, this powerful meteor-level Yuan Ku, who needed 6 famed swordsmen to defeat, was facing a challenge from a mere famed swordsman. A human. It's been a long time since I've smelled such nostalgia. I really miss the days when I was a human, even though those days made me feel so disgusted. Arthas rode on her skeletal warhorse and looked down at Guhan. Withered human. The merciful king has decided to grant you eternal life. Become a skeleton warrior under my command. Meteor-level Yuan Ku? I wonder how his combat power is compared to Jean's. Guhan did not care about what the Death Knight said at all. Instead, he looked at the Death Knight's body with great interest. He secretly estimated whether the Death Knight could become his opponent and help him improve his Chaos Sword technique. Return. My skeleton warrior. The Death Knight Arthas directly slashed at Guhan's neck. This sword attack was as fast as a bullet in the eyes of ordinary people, but in Guhan's eyes, it was like slow motion. Seems like you're not as good as Queen Jean, Guhan gently blocked with the juicy sword in his hand, skillfully pushing Arthas's giant sword to the other side. At the same time, his body flashed and appeared behind Arthas. At the same time, he slashed through the gap in Arthas's armor, leaving a deep wound on Arthas's body. Weak. Still too weak, Guhan said. Chapter 944. That's impossible. You're just a famed sword-grade swordsman. Although he was already dead, Arthur's eyes were still filled with disbelief. This powerful Death Knight had finally turned into a pile of broken bones and was absorbed by the dimensional vortex. It's not enough, it's still not enough. Looks like the fallen sword-grade Yuan Ku can no longer improve my swordsmanship. Guhan had a cold expression on his face. In the battle with Arthas, Guhan was like the other spirit sword-grade sword maidens. He did not use his sword essence from start to finish. Even so, Guhan only spent less than an hour and a half to kill Arthas. Arthas was not an ordinary Yuan Ku. He was a true fallen sword-grade Yuan Ku. Guhan could defeat his opponent without using sword essence. So, if Guhan used sword essence, how much stronger would he be? What was even more terrifying was that Guhan's improvement had not reached its limit. The real limit would probably be when Guhan completely perfected his Chaos Sword technique. When that time came, Guhan would be looking forward to facing Gilgamesh again. Guhan wanted to return all the humiliation he had suffered to this opponent. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh was already dead. System notification. Quest 5, Underground Labyrinth completed. Your party has arrived at the Dimensional Altar. Quest progress 40%. Main quest updated. System notification. Quest 6, Save King Arthur. King Arthur Artoria Pendragon has been bound by magic. Please break the magic binding and save the controlled King Arthur. Guhan couldn't help but let out a sigh when he saw King Arthur Artoria Pendragon, who was wearing a snow-white wedding gown and had a seductive butt. He walked towards the Dimensional Altar. I wonder if everyone still remembers that this Dimensional Altar is actually a very dangerous trap. The surroundings of the Dimensional Altar were filled with dimensional turbulence. No matter who it was, once they touched these dimensional turbulence, they would be torn to pieces in an instant. Even a spirit sword-grade swordsman was no exception, let alone a famed sword-grade swordsman. Even if Guhan's strength had increased by a terrifying amount, it was only in terms of swordsmanship. In terms of physical fitness, Guhan's physical fitness was still that of an ordinary famed sword-grade swordsman. The Juzi sword's protective shield was still that of a famed sword-grade swordsman. Steel Centipede, who had hundreds of thousands of quark sword essence and had top-notch defensive abilities and skills, only had 4% of its protective shield energy left in the face of the dimensional turbulence. Although the Juzi sword's defensive ratio far exceeded Steelbang's by 2 times, the sword essence in Guhan's body was less than a third of Steelbang's. In other words, the defensive ability of Guhan's Juzi sword's close-fitting shield was simply not comparable to Steelbang's. If Guhan chose to face the dimensional turbulence head-on, Guhan would probably die on the spot with the Juzi sword's ability. Of course, if Guhan was willing to use the starting point sword, it would be a different story. But for some reason, the game did not scan the starting point sword's ability to use the upper limit of sword essence as a protective shield energy. Therefore, the starting point sword's performance here might not be as practical as the Juzi sword. In this case, it seemed that Guhan could only follow the method written in his guide to remove the dimensional turbulence of the Dimensional Altar. According to the method described in Guhan's guide, 5 people needed to cooperate from different directions to remove the magic runes on the arena and make the dimensional turbulence disappear. However, Guhan was alone now. It was impossible for him to gather 5 people. Even if he could gather 5 people, Guhan did not want to use such a complicated method. Guhan stepped onto the dimensional altar without hesitation. He did not even look at the magic runes on the altar as he casually stepped on it. 4 spatial turbulence instantly appeared beside Guhan, preparing to slash at Guhan's body. However, Guhan did not panic. He tapped the juicy sword a few times in the air, and the spatial turbulence that had been aimed at Guhan seemed to be disrupted by something. The four turbulence collided at the same time, and the powerful energy collision instantly triggered a riot in the entire dimensional altar. All the dimensional turbulence exploded like a bomb. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The entire dimensional altar was razed to the ground by the explosion of the dimensional turbulence. The entire altar disappeared, and a deep pit the size of half a basketball court appeared in the ground. However, although the altar had disappeared, the person on the altar was safe and sound. Guhan had appeared in the safe zone of the temple at some point in time, carrying the unconscious Artoria in his arms. Amazing! Amazing! You were actually able to use your sword chi to shake the entire space and affect the path of the dimensional turbulence, ultimately detonating everything. Your swordsmanship is truly terrifying. It's no wonder that Arthas, who was at the door, died under your sword. Furthermore, you were able to rescue Artoria and bring her to a safe place within a single second of the dimensional turbulence's impact. I'm afraid that your Excellency's movement technique is one of the rarest in the human world. It's really hard to imagine how such a powerful famed swordsman like your Excellency was born. In my life, I'm afraid I've only seen two human swordsmen reach such a terrifying level. One had red lips, white teeth, and a pale face, but was extraordinarily handsome. The one wearing a pointy wizard hat and a black wizard robe stood in front of Guhan in admiration. This was naturally Artoria's teacher, the meteor-level Grand Mage Yuan Ku Merlin, whom Guhan still couldn't figure out which side he was on. "Do you want to fight me?" Guhan squinted at Grand Mage Merlin. I don't dare. Grand Mage Merlin waved his hands. What a joke. Even Arthas was defeated by him. Wouldn't he be courting death if he went over? Then I'm leaving. Ji Han raised the juicy sword in his hand and used Chaos Splits the Heavens. A rainbow-like sword chi shot into the sky, creating a huge hole in the ceiling of the divine hall. Then, Ji Han directly jumped out of the hole. Boom, boom, boom. My dear elf goddess, why is the script so messed up this time? With such a terrifying guy interfering, will there be any unforeseen events? Grand Mage Merlin couldn't help but shiver when he saw the large hole in the ceiling. This underground temple was built using ancient technology. Even universe-level Yuan Ku would have to spend a lot of effort to break through the ceiling. This human was only a famed swordsman, but his sword energy could actually break through the entire ceiling. This kind of strength was no different from the 10 kings of the Martyr's Palace. Will Hitler and the others fail miserably? Grand Mage Merlin muttered to himself. At this moment, he realized that the entire situation seemed to be completely out of his control. I didn't expect Chaos Flying Immortal to have such a terrifying power when combined with sword essence. I'm afraid the power of that sword just now has already surpassed the power of 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven at the same level of sword essence. Guhan himself was also surprised by the power of that sword. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven was the move with the most terrifying single target damage in the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven. It allowed Guhan to burst out with more than 10 times the damage. It was equivalent to Guhan's trump card. However, when Guhan used the newly created Chaos Flying Immortal for the first time with 10,000 quarks of sword essence, the power that burst out shocked Guhan. This was because the power of this sword was also more than 10 times the damage that 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven could cause with 10,000 quarks of sword essence. Adding the two together, Guhan could burst out with a sword that was 100 times more powerful than a normal move. With this move, Chaos Flying Immortal, Guhan could almost declare that he was already invincible among sword bearers at the spiritual sword level when he used sword essence. This was only in the game, and Guhan only had 70 to 80,000 quarks of sword essence. If it was in reality with Guhan's more than 400,000 quarks of sword essence, even if it was a sword bearer at the immortal sword level, if the other party did not use the Gate of the Void, perhaps only the top few would be able to fight with Guhan head-on. I didn't expect just Chaos Flying Immortal to be this terrifying. If I complete all the remaining 4 moves of Chaos Sword technique, then my Chaos Sword technique will probably become a sword technique comparable to the Billion Sword technique and the Yin Yang Sword technique ! Guhan thought silently in his heart. In fact, when he developed Chaos Splitting the Heavens, Guhan did not know how many moves the final product of Chaos Sword technique would have. However, at this moment, a sudden realization surged in Guhan's heart. That was, when Guhan completely completed the Chaos Sword technique, there should be a total of 7 moves in the Chaos Sword technique. At this time, Guhan had already created Chaos Splitting the Heavens, Chaos Stars, and Chaos Flying Immortal. These 3 sword moves were Chaos Splitting the Heavens, Chaos Stars, and Chaos Flying Immortal. He was still 4 moves away from completing the Chaos Sword technique. Just creating the previous 3 moves had already cost Guhan a lot of time and energy. It had also allowed Guhan to achieve the terrifying achievement of being invincible below the spiritual sword level just by relying on his sword technique. According to these conditions, Guhan would probably need to defeat an Emperor Sword level swordbearer in order to completely create the entire Chaos Sword technique. Defeating an Emperor Sword level swordbearer with just sword technique? Guhan could not help but stare at the juicy sword in his hand and silently asked himself, is this really something that a human can do? Chapter 945. Under the suppression of absolute strength, after nearly half a year, this King Arthur's Betrayal Instance dungeon, which had forced Guhan to rack his brains, discover all the subtle clues, and use all possible means to complete it, had now become a toy in the hands of a baby in Guhan's eyes. He could easily crush the entire instance dungeon with 1 foot. The only thing that could make Guhan look forward to it was the opponents that would appear next. According to the dungeon strategy, Guhan should escape at full speed with Artoria and try his best to avoid the 3 universe-level Yuan Ku's pursuit. He absolutely couldn't let the universe-level Yuan Ku catch up to him, or else Guhan would die. Well, that was a matter of a few months ago. For the current Guhan, the only thing he was looking forward to was the 3 universe-level Yuan Kus that were about to arrive. Yes, this was the main reason why Guhan returned to the King Arthur's Betrayal Instance dungeon. He didn't want to continue his relationship with Artoria, who was in the instance dungeon. Guhan's real goal was the 3 universe-level Yuan Kus that were chasing him, and they would become Guhan's best training targets. After the Spirit Sword level swordbearers couldn't help Guhan improve his swordsmanship, Guhan could only place his hope on these universe-level Yuan Kus to train himself. Therefore, after Guhan rescued Artoria, he didn't run far. Instead, he came to an empty ruin, put Artoria's body on his lap, and silently waited for the universe-level Yuan Ku's arrival. At this moment, Artoria's snow-white skin and the simple and elegant wedding dress made her look so charming that Guhan couldn't help but have an impulse. Before entering this instance dungeon, Guhan had a clear goal of completing the dungeon's mission. Plus, he had been fleeing passionately along the way, so Guhan didn't have much time to care about Artoria's beautiful body. Even if he had to take off Artoria's wedding dress for some reason and completely see Artoria's graceful naked body, Guhan didn't have the mood to care about other inexplicable things. But now it was different. Now Guhan had completely given up on completing the mission, and the nearest Nazi king, Hitler, would need at least an hour to rush over. This way, Guhan could quietly accompany the unconscious Artoria for a full hour without any pressure. This hour was enough for Guhan to let his imagination run wild. As for whether or not Guhan did anything to Artoria in this hour, we can discuss this in the future and won't talk about it here. Scum. Scum, why didn't you escape? Are you looking down on the Great Reich Chancellor? Seeing the long-awaited appearance of the Third Reich of Germany, Ji Han knew that he had watched Artoria fight while his opponent was Hitler, one of the 10 kings of the Valhalla, the Nazi king. Let's fight. Ji Han shrugged his shoulders, then straightened his clothes that had slipped a little. He looked at the Third Reich with great interest and said, Hitler's combat power was not that great, but the Third Reich's combat power was amazing, especially its defensive ability. It was unknown what kind of metal the surface of the Third Reich was made of. Without using sword essence, Guhan could only leave a few shallow marks on the surface of the Third Reich's body with his own sword skills. This was like a naughty child taking a key and drawing marks on a shiny car. Although it looked quite annoying, and the 4S shop would often charge a few $1,000s for damage. But in fact, these marks were nothing to a car, and could not affect the performance of the car at all. It was just ugly. The damage that Guhan caused to the Third Reich was probably similar to the scratches on the surface of the car. Although it looked quite powerful, it was actually useless. This was also the limitation of Guhan's pure sword skills. That was, when facing an opponent with extremely strong defense and who could defend from all angles, no matter how good one's swordsmanship was, it would be useless, because solid cold could not attack the opponent's effective parts. Of course, if Guhan used sword essence, the result would be completely different. With the blessing of sword essence, Guhan was confident that he could open a hole in the armor of the Third Reich, and as long as there was a hole that could allow Guhan to enter the armor of the Third Reich, Guhan was confident that he could kill Hitler. After all, no matter how strong a fortress was, it could not withstand damage from the inside. Of course, the Third Reich also could not cause fatal damage to Guhan. This was because Guhan's movement was too flexible, and the Third Reich's attacks were very stiff and rigid. For Guhan, it was a piece of cake to avoid such attacks. However, when the Law Hammurabi also arrived, Guhan's battle came to an end. Facing the attacks of two universe-level Yuan Ku at the same time, Guhan was as fragile as a seagull in a storm. He was easily thrown into the deep sea and was doomed eternally. Then, he was forced to quit the game because he failed the mission. For the next month, Guhan was completely immersed in the King Arthur's betrayal dungeon. On average, Guhan entered the dungeon more than 10 times a day, which meant that he had to fight more than 10 times with Hitler's Third Reich. In 1 month, that was more than 300 battles, and more than 300 battles were lost. It was different from the previous battles with the Spirit Sword level swordsman. In the battles with the Spirit Sword level swordsman, Guhan's longest battle was 9 consecutive defeats. Finally, he won the 10th time and defeated the Spirit Sword level swordsman. However, after more than 300 battles, not to mention consecutive victories, Guhan didn't even see any progress. This was because Guhan couldn't penetrate the armor of the Third Reich without using the sword element, which meant that Guhan couldn't cause any substantial damage to Hitler. Of course, in this month, Guhan wasn't without results. At least, Guhan's control of his power had improved a lot. Before, the damage that Guhan caused to the Third Reich was like a child holding a key and scratching the paint of a flower car. Now, the damage that Guhan caused to the Third Reich was like an adult holding a pair of sharp scissors. If Guhan's damage to the Third Reich could increase at this rate, then Guhan probably wouldn't be able to penetrate the armor of the Third Reich after 100 years. But even a fool knew that this actually didn't have any meaning, because with the physical fitness of a famous sword-level swordsman, such damage would eventually reach a limit that could no longer be advanced. Even if such a limit didn't exist, Guhan didn't have 100 years to waste in this dungeon. So it stood to reason that after a month of failure, Guhan should give up this stupid thing. Either he should give up and fight with a slightly lower defense Yuan Ku who could break the defense of Guhan, or Guhan should simply change his way of improving his swordsmanship. Anyway, he couldn't fight to the death with the Third Reich like a fool. Don't believe in idioms like how water dripping wears through a stone and an iron pestle grinds a needle. It would take 10,000 years for a drop of water to wear away a stone, and the story of grinding a needle with an iron pestle was a complete joke. This was just a story written by an otaku in the Song dynasty. The credibility of this story was as nonsensical as the novels XX Firmament, XX World and Sword Maiden written by those web novelists at home. But unexpectedly, Guhan kept persevering. Even if the ending was the same every time, Guhan still persisted. But this wasn't because Guhan was stupid, and it wasn't because Guhan believed in idioms like how an iron pestle grinds a needle and water dripping wears through a stone. It was because Guhan had a vague feeling that the next move of his Chaos Sword technique was hidden on the Third Reich. As long as Guhan could find a way to break the turtle shell of the Third Reich, then Guhan would be able to learn the fourth move of the Chaos Sword technique, trial by law. You are guilty and deserve to be cut into pieces. Countless swords appeared around Guhan, but these swords didn't seem to have a physical body and were just illusory existences. But these illusory swords made it impossible for Guhan to dodge, because these swords didn't attack Guhan in a physical sense. They were just floating in the air, and Guhan felt a pain from the depths of his body, as if countless swords were cutting into him. His body shield didn't suffer any damage, and he didn't lose any energy, but Guhan's body directly collapsed, turning into minced meat and disappearing from this world. This was how Guhan died for the past month. It was as miserable as a fat pig being cut into pieces. After dying in such a miserable way one day, Guhan was ready to make another effort to challenge Hitler in the game. A group push news caught Guhan's attention. It was a piece of historical and cultural news. It was about a team of swordsmen from Yangjing City who found a book with only a few pages left in the ruins of the ancient city of Chengdu. The name of the book was already untraceable, and even the content of the book was difficult to analyze from these few pages. Therefore, the Society of Historical and Cultural Research simply took photos of the remaining pages and sent them to all the members of the Society of Historical and Cultural Research, hoping that they could brainstorm and analyze what the book was talking about. Guhan curiously flipped through these few pages. This page seemed to be about a teacher teaching her students. What impressed Guhan the most was that the female teacher was teaching her students what was internal force and how to practice internal force. What is internal force? When a person moves, every movement produces energy and heat, and this energy and heat contains internal force. When a person's pores are closed, sweat can't flow out, and heat can't evaporate. When a person moves vigorously, the blood and energy in their body will turn into this heat, and the energy and sweat will be released through the pores. This is the principle of training energy into internal force, which is also internal force. Whether one can hold this internal force or not is the standard of whether one has internal force or not. Internal force can also be trained in the whole body. In the eyes of the Jiyu Han, the logic contained in these words was as unreasonable as a fart. However, what made the Jiyu Han feel extremely uncomfortable was that these words continued to linger in the Jiyu Han's mind. This sentence was like a fishbone stuck in Guhan's mind, making it impossible for Guhan to sleep well. It made Guhan think about this sentence for 3 days and 3 nights. Guhan could feel that this sentence seemed to be hiding some great path of swordsmanship, but Guhan still couldn't figure out what this great path was, and how it should be reflected in his swordsmanship. Chapter 946. On a certain day, Guhan launched the 312th battle against the German Third Reich in more than a month. Of course, this time, Guhan still failed. By the time Emarabi appeared, Jiyu Han had already been cut into pieces by 1,000 blades. If someone could carefully use nano-level high-precision equipment to analyze the traces of this battle, then this person might find that this time, the marks caused by Guhan on the metal armor of the German Third Reich were not deeper than the last 311th battle, but correspondingly weaker. It was just that the weakening was so small that it could only be detected on a nano-level scale. In the 323rd battle, the marks caused by this battle were compared to the marks caused by the 311th battle. It could already be seen with the naked eye that the marks caused by this battle had decreased. In the 356th battle, the marks caused by the sharp scissors in the hands of an adult had changed back to the marks caused by the key in the hands of a child. In the 383rd battle, the marks of the battle seemed to have become faint. Unless one held a magnifying glass in their hands, it was impossible to see the marks caused by the battle. In the 499th battle, it was now necessary to use nano-level high-precision equipment again. It was just that previously it was to check the extent of the changes in the marks, but this time it was to check whether there were any marks on the surface of the German Third Reich because the marks caused by Guhan could no longer be seen with the naked eye. However, Guhan seemed to be stuck here. In the next 100 battles, Guhan was unable to improve this result. Guhan felt that there was a thin layer of window paper in front of him. As long as he could pierce through this layer of window paper, Guhan could achieve his goal. But this thin layer of window paper seemed to be like cowhide, and Guhan was unable to pierce through it. Watching the days go by, Guhan's calm temper began to gradually become anxious. Anyone who had failed 600 times in an experiment would have developed this kind of anxiety. Don't tell me that Edison had experimented with more than 10,000 materials to make light bulbs. At that time, Edison was already the rich boss of the General Electric Company. These more than 10,000 experiments were not conducted by Edison alone, but by hundreds of experimenters in more than a dozen laboratories under Edison's command, including the future father of alternating current power transmission, Nikola Tesla. As for Edison himself, at most, he would go around the laboratory once a day, give the hard-working experimenters some cheap encouragement, and then openly claim the experimental results as his own. Of course, from a legal point of view, these experimental results and patents should naturally belong to Edison. After all, Edison was the one who paid these experimenters to do experiments. But Edison shamelessly took all the credit for these results. He didn't mention the names of these poor experimenters in any news reports. Even the signatures at the end of the paper didn't give these experimenters who had worked hard for several years a chance. It was no wonder that Nikola Tesla left General Electric and became lifelong enemies with Edison. P.S. Edison was actually a very despicable guy. He was far from the king of inventions in the media. In fact, 70% to 80% of the patents he invented in his life were invented by the experimenters under him, and Edison shamelessly took all these titles for himself. Of course, it was undeniable that Edison's invention and scientific research abilities were indeed the best. Just as Guhan was about to be tortured by the 600th failure, another opportunity appeared in front of Guhan. This opportunity did not come from a novel before the apocalypse like the last time, but from the two fellows under Guhan who were the most troublesome, Qingpin and Yi Tian. In fact, this time, Yi Tian was unjustly implicated. After the 599th failure, Guhan decided to take a day off to recover his physical strength. More importantly, he wanted to adjust his mentality and find a way to find the source of the problem. But it was also at this time that Guhan suddenly saw a scene that he did not know how to ridicule. Yi Tian took advantage of the break to drink over 100 bottles of wine. Then, drunk, she fell asleep on the bed. At this time, the gluttonous Qingpin actually took advantage of the opportunity when Guhan was not paying attention to secretly hold the bottles of wine that Yi Tian left on the ground and gulped down a few bottles of wine. His little face instantly became red, and then he began to walk drunkenly. Not only did he walk, but Qingpin also climbed onto Yi Tian's bed unsteadily. Then, he bit Yi Tian's arm. Perhaps he felt that the arm didn't taste good, so he bit Yi Tian's neck. Perhaps he still felt that Yi Tian's neck wasn't easy to bite. In short, Qingpin almost bit Yi Tian's body all over, and in a daze, he finally bit Yi Tian's foot. Good heavens, it directly ate Yi Tian's toe in one bite. Then, in an instant, Qingpin's eyes bulged, and he spat out his foot. He bit Yi Tian twice, and his big cute eyes blurred as he began to cry. While crying, he shouted, "So stinky, so stinky, so disgusting." Qingpin did not think that Yi Tian was the most restless among Guhan's sword maidens. As long as he had free time, he would wander around everywhere, running at least 10 kilometers every day. Of course, his feet were filled with the smell of a beauty. Perhaps because he felt that crying alone was not enough to vent his anger, Qingpin decided to take revenge on Yi Tian. However, no one knew what was in her poor head. She actually stepped on the Heavenly Reliance's pair of towering, mountain-like European pies, and started jumping up and down. Yes, that's right, Qingpin probably treated Yi Tian's opium pies as two springs. He stepped on them and began to jump crazily. Not to mention, the elasticity of these two springs was really not bad. It actually allowed Qingpin to jump 4 or 5 meters high. Even the standing high jump of the Olympic Games might not be able to achieve such a result. Qingpin jumped for dozens of minutes, and the huge movement even alerted Guhan. But when Guhan saw this scene, his attention was not on Qingpin, who deserved a spanking, but on Yi Tian, who was still sleeping soundly under Qingpin's feet. Even if there was the effect of alcohol, ordinary people should have woken up long ago after being tortured like this. How could Yi Tian still sleep so soundly as if nothing had happened? Thinking of this, Guhan did not stop Qingpin's terrible behavior. Instead, he became a focused spectator, carefully watching Qingpin's jump in his head, especially the moment when Qingpin's feet came into contact with Yi Tian's opium pies. Yi Tian's opium pies underwent a wonderful transformation, and at the same time, it produced an upward elasticity, pushing Qingpin's body up again. This was such a wonderful process that Guhan didn't feel tired even after watching it hundreds of times. On the other hand, Qingpin was a little tired from jumping. He was sweating profusely and was ready to give up on taking revenge on Yi Tian. "Wait," Guhan called out to Qingpin, "continue jumping. Don't stop unless I tell you to." Things were often like this in the world. The same thing, if you took the initiative to do it, then you would feel that it was very enjoyable. However, if someone forced you to do it, then you would feel that it was the most painful thing in the world. To Qingpin, the current situation was more or less like this. No matter how happy she was jumping on Yi Tian's opium pies, when it became Guhan's mandatory order, Qingpin couldn't be happy no matter what. Although she was still jumping, the expression on her face was as bitter as if her sword wielder had died. If she continued to jump, we didn't doubt that Qingpin would really start crying. Fortunately, after a short while, Guhan suddenly slapped his head and instantly went back into the game. He didn't even have time to bring these sword ladies into the game. However, Guhan didn't need to bring them in, because to Guhan, it was enough to have their sword ladies in the game. After quickly completing all the foreplay, Guhan also saw the third Rai for the 600th time. However, this time, Guhan was already prepared. It was still the same fighting style as before. Guhan's sword attacked the surface of the third Rai's armor. However, it was different from before. Although Guhan's sword kept colliding with the third Rai, the surface of the third Rai's armor didn't even have a trace of damage. Even with nano-level detection equipment, it wasn't able to detect a trace of damage. This was almost impossible because even if an ant crawled across the surface of the third Rai, nano-level detection equipment would be able to detect traces of the ant's path. However, when Guhan's sword collided with it, nothing was left. Guhan didn't hide his strength. On the contrary, when Guhan attacked, the muscles on his entire arm bulged. It was obvious that he had poured all his strength into the sword in his hand. 1 sword. 2 swords. 3 swords. 9 swords. In a flash, Guhan slashed a total of 9 swords on the third Rai. If the trajectories of these 9 swords were all connected, then one would be surprised to find that Guhan had drawn a lotus pattern on the surface of the third Rai. As soon as the lotus was drawn, Guhan fell from the third Rai as if he had exhausted all his strength. He fell heavily on the ground and didn't even have the strength to move his fingers, let alone get up from the ground. "Trash. Is that all you have? You're not even as good as a woman." Hitler's laughter came from the third Rai through the loudspeakers. At this time, only less than 20 seconds had passed since the start of the battle. In 20 seconds, Guhan fell to the ground like a dead dog. In Hitler's eyes, this guy was indeed not even as good as a woman. "Trash. Let the Führer." The third Rai raised the particle cannon in its hand. As long as the cannon grazed the edge of Guhan's skin, Guhan's body would disintegrate in an instant and turn into a pile of the purest particles in the world. "Fire! Fire! Fire!" Hitler kept pressing the firing button in the control room, but there was no response from the third Rai. "Trash. This machine crashed again." Hitler thought that the third Rai had suddenly crashed. This was not an abnormal thing. No matter how powerful a computer was, it would still crash when it needed to. But it didn't matter if it crashed, as long as it was restarted. Hitler thought so too. When he pressed the restart button, the entire German Third Reich suddenly let out a loud roar. Then, the interior of the German Third Reich seemed to have lost all support. It collapsed to the ground like an inverted pyramid, completely turning into a pile of waste. This move, "I'll call you Chaos Golden Lotus." Guhan, who was lying on the ground, looked at the scene in front of him with satisfaction and gave the fourth move of chaos swordsmanship such a name. Chapter 947. Chaotic Golden Lotus was the fourth move in the Chaos Sword technique that Guhan had created. It was also the most insidious move in the Chaos Sword technique. It was a move that Guhan had created by combining the hidden force recorded in the novel From Before the Apocalypse, as well as the soft force that Guhan had comprehended from watching Qingpin jumping around the heavens Europa sect. When this chaotic golden lotus was practiced to the highest level, even if one used all their strength to slash at the opponent's body, not a single hair on the opponent's skin would be harmed. However, in reality, the force that was like a golden lotus would penetrate the opponent's skin and enter the opponent's body. On the surface, it would look fine, but the force had already entered the opponent's body. One could imagine how terrifying it would be once a powerful force entered one's internal organs. Even if one had the defensive ability of the World Emperor alloy, once this sharp force entered one's body, there was no doubt that only death awaited them. This was why the marks that Guhan left on the surface of the German Third Reich were getting shallower and shallower. As the marks got shallower and shallower, more and more sword chi entered the opponent's body. When there were no longer any marks left on the surface of the body, as if it had not been touched at all, it meant that all of the sword chi had entered the opponent's body. At the same time, the damage of the chaotic golden lotus was stacked with the nth power. For example, if the chaotic golden lotus was used continuously, the first strike could cause 100 points of damage in the opponent's body, then the second strike could cause 200 points of damage, and the third strike could cause 400 points of damage. When Guhan had killed Hitler, he had stacked 9 strikes, which was equivalent to causing 200,000 points of damage in the interior of the German Third Reich. Guhan had deliberately vented this damage on the German Third Reich's power core. This attack had directly caused the power core of the German Third Reich to explode, instantly destroying the internal parts of the German Third Reich. However, this also proved how terrifying the defense of the German Third Reich's armor was. Even if there was an explosion inside the Third Reich, its external armor was still intact. It was like a firecracker. You ignited the gunpowder hidden inside the firecracker, but the circle of red paper wrapped around the firecracker did not move at all. In a sense, it was indeed a squib. However, 9 strikes wasn't the limit of the Chaos Golden Lotus. In theory, the Chaos Golden Lotus could stack countless strikes. In fact, when Guhan could stack up to 20 strikes, the 20th strike would be able to deal 1048,57600 damage, which was more than 100 million damage. Moreover, this was only the damage Guhan dealt when he didn't use sword essence. Once Guhan used sword essence in tandem with sword essence and activated his sword energy, the damage he dealt would be at least tenfold, reaching a frightening 1 billion damage. This was not an injury that any existence could withstand. Even if it was an expert whose ability surpassed an Emperor Sword-level sword wielder, when his body suffered such a strong injury, he would probably die immediately. There would definitely be no accidents. However, whether Guhan could successfully use the 10th strike was also a big question mark, let alone the 20th strike. Just like the terrifying stacking damage of the Chaos Golden Lotus, the Chaos Golden Lotus required a similarly terrifying amount of stamina and energy. For example, after Guhan used the Chaos Golden Lotus 9 strikes, he could only lie on the ground like a dead dog. This was because Guhan had exhausted all of his stamina and energy. For Guhan, if he wanted to break through the limit of the Chaos Golden Lotus 9 strikes and use the 10th strike, he would have to at least wait for Guhan to synchronize with a Spirit Sword-level sword lady. If this video of the battle were to be released, the whole world would probably go crazy over Ji Yuhan's results again. A famed sword-level sword wielder could actually defeat the Third German Reich, which was equivalent to a fairy sword-level sword wielder, without using sword element. If Guhan used sword element, wouldn't he be able to go against the natural order and directly defeat an Emperor sword-level sword wielder? Needless to say, the crown of the number 1 sword wielder in history would pass from Kunzu's head to Guhan's head. Guhan would also officially become the number 1 sword wielder. However, Guhan knew in his heart that this was pure bullshit. Even though Guhan had indeed defeated the U-level Yuan Ku Nazi King Hitler, this did not mean that Guhan truly had the ability to defeat the U-level Yuan Ku. On the contrary, this was completely due to Guhan's luck. First of all, Guhan's opponent was the Nazi King Hitler, a special U-level Yuan Ku. Hitler was probably the one with the highest attack and defense among all the U-level Yuan Ku. However, the Third German Reich's agility was really terrible. No matter how strong the Third German Reich's attack was, it could not defeat the agile Guhan. At the same time, the Third German Reich's weakness was very obvious. Its power core itself was too weak. Usually, the power core was very safe under the protection of the hard external armor, so it could not become the Third German Reich's weakness. However, when the Third German Reich's proud defense was no longer there, this fatal weakness was completely exposed. Otherwise, how could a mere 200,000 damage kill the U-level Yuan Ku with tens of millions of HP? In fact, Hitler had basically died from his own suicide. This was very similar to his original ending. Another important point was that Hitler had severely underestimated his enemy. Every U-level Yuan Ku had the ability to enter the void. Although the Third German Reich didn't have the ability to enter the void, the problem was that Hitler himself could. As long as Hitler himself hid in the void the moment the Third German Reich exploded, he would be able to escape unscathed. After a while, the Third German Reich would automatically repair itself, and Hitler would be a good man again. Unfortunately, Hitler didn't expect that a human who couldn't even leave a mark on the Third German Reich's armor could actually detonate the Third German Reich's power core. Hitler didn't know that the power core of the Third German Reich had exploded until the moment he died. Hitler died without knowing why. Therefore, when Guhan encountered other U-level Yuan Ku, it was still unrealistic to defeat the opponent without using sword essence. First of all, 200,000 damage couldn't cause fatal damage to most U-level Yuan Ku. Not every U-level Yuan Ku was like Hitler and had a power core that could kill him. More importantly, the opponent only needed to hide in the void. Then, before Guhan also had the ability to enter the void, Guhan couldn't do anything to these U-level Yuan Ku. In summary, Guhan didn't plan to announce his achievements. Otherwise, if other people suggested that Guhan kill another U-level Yuan Ku and Guhan couldn't, it would be very embarrassing. For Guhan, being able to create the fourth move of the Chaos Sword Art, Chaos Golden Lotus, was Guhan's biggest reward. This meant that Guhan was one step closer to the peak of sword art. However, what Guhan didn't expect was that after Guhan killed Hitler, the system suddenly sent a series of notifications. System notification: you have killed the Nazi King Hitler and activated the King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon's hidden Easter egg. You have successfully activated the hidden 12 skyscraping temples dungeon. System notification: the hidden Easter egg has been activated. King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon is about to close. Please leave the dungeon or be forcefully kicked out after 30 seconds. System notification: the hidden Easter egg has been activated. King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon will forever seal player military governor. Player military governor can no longer enter King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon. Just as the system prompt stated, when Ji Yuhan left the instance dungeon and opened up the instance dungeon tree to search for King Arthur's betrayal again, he discovered that the instance dungeon's name had disappeared from its original position. In its place was a dungeon called 12 Skyscraping Temples. What a pity. I won't be able to see Artoria again. Seeing that, Guhan could not help but feel regret. As such, before the next instance dungeon related to Artoria was opened, Guhan would forever lose the chance to see Artoria again. In the entire game world's 200 years, only one instance dungeon related to Artoria had been opened. Who knew when the next instance dungeon would open? 10 years? 20 years? Or 120 years? Or could it be 1,200 years? Well, the happiness in the game was only temporary and illusory. Guhan's ultimate goal was to find traces of Artoria in the real world. According to the various clues, Artoria should be trapped in a desperate situation, waiting for Guhan's rescue. However, as the saying goes, what you lose on the swings, you gain on the mulberry. When the King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon closed to Ji Yuhan, a brand new 12 Skyscraping Temples dungeon appeared before Ji Yuhan. What kind of dungeon was this hidden dungeon? The hidden dungeon in Sword Maiden Online had always had one meaning, and that was similar to the King Arthur's Betrayal Dungeon. After the dungeon was cleared for the first time, the entire dungeon would be opened to all players. However, such a hidden dungeon would usually only appear in July or August of the second year. It was only February now, and the timing did not match up at all. Gina-chan, what does this dungeon mean? If there was anything in the game that he did not understand, he could ask Tomono Kakaze. Therefore, Guhan directly contacted Tomono Kakaze and told Tomono Kakaze everything that he had encountered. What? You killed the universe-level Yuan-Ku with the ability of a famed sword-level player? You scared me to death, Tomono Kakaze said as she patted her small chest. However, she did not look that surprised. This was because Tomono Kakaze did not know that Guhan had killed the universe-level Yuan-Ku without using sword essence. Otherwise, Tomono Kakaze's artificial intelligence core might have a logical breakdown. That's not the point. The point is this 12 skyscraping temples dungeon. What is going on with this dungeon? Can I go in? Guhan straightforwardly asked the question in his heart. 12 skyscraping temples? Isn't this an abandoned dungeon? Tomono Kakaze said in shock. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.